Darkness was his only refuge. Here, hidden inside the storage area where 10-year-old kids could not find him, Izuku could finally breathe. His back still burned from Bakugu's latest lesson, and his soaked clothes clung to his skin. He clenched his teeth. He couldn't afford to get sick. Not again. Above him, through a small, dust-covered window, the sunlight was fading. Soon he would have to go home, walk through the crowded streets where people avoided his gaze, go back to his house, where his mother would smile, exhausted, and where he would pretend that everything was fine. That was his daily life, his world, a world where he was nothing, or at least that's what he thought. Until everything changed. Izuku walked out of the storage room, observing quietly if anyone was around. No one. It was better that way. He started to walk slowly home, letting his bag drag on the ground. He felt a chill run down his body when the wind blew his way. He couldn't afford to be sick, so he walked faster. He didn't want to worry his mother. Walking home alone wasn't hard, it was mostly painful because of his too small shoes, but it was fine. Weirdly enough, Izuku was never scared of the dark. Running through the numerous dark passages didn't scare him, but today felt different. He felt like he was being watched. He brushed the feeling off and ran home faster than ever. Arriving home, he felt welcomed by the silence of the house. His mother was probably working late again. He removed his shoes and entered the house, pushing his bag into a corner of the room before running to his bedroom. He turned his computer on, excited to finally spend the rest of the day watching some hero videos. Excitement bubbled in him as he watched one of his favorite videos over and over again. He imitated the famous smile of the #1 hero while standing proudly with both hands on his hips. But then his eyes fell on the mirror across his room. He saw the weirdly green child imitating a hero, while he was deemed worthless by others. He sat down and listened silently to the video this time. As the video ended, the black screen of the computer greeted Izuku. He stared at his reflection deeply. Worthless rang in his head over and over. His hands started to tremble, and quickly, tears ran down his puffy cheeks. His little breakdown quickly stopped when he heard the key in the door. His mother was home. He couldn't let her see him cry. After all, he was a big guy. His mother even let him walk home alone. He couldn't let her down. So he put a smile on and ran to his mother. "Mommy!" he yelled, ignoring the worsening pain in his back. "Izuku, you're home." She smiled while hugging her son. "How was your day?" she asked happily. Izuku quickly replied with a good, while mumbling about his day, inventing happy experiences he never had. She listened to everything while cooking a quick dinner for the two of them. Izuku sat down at one of the chairs around the dining table, kicking his feet while enjoying talking to his mother, even if everything he said was a lie. And Inko Midoriya enjoyed every last bit of the story, even if she knew Izuku had most likely lied about his day. A ringing phone quickly followed. Inko looked at Izuku. "Daddy called," she whispered to him while taking the phone call. And just as Inko knew Izuku's lie, her son knew her lie too. But he ignored the failed attempt. Inko talked for a while on the phone, taking a quick glance at Izuku from time to time, then resumed cooking. "Was it Daddy?" Izuku asked his mother, who nervously laughed and nodded. "Yes, it was. He said he missed you and can't wait to come back from his business trip." A lie, a white lie, but a lie nonetheless. Izuku knew his dad would never come back from his business trip. But if this lie could keep his mother happy, then he would keep pretending his father was at the end of the line. Dinner was lively between the two. Even exhausted, Inko smiled and enjoyed the moment. They both cleaned their plates and then sat on the sofa, cuddling into each other's arms, enjoying the news on TV and talking during breaks. It was a nice evening in the Midoriya household. The next day, while walking down the usual path to school, Izuku felt like he was being observed again. He sped up, mentally noting that he would take a more open, noisy path on his way home. But then he felt a hit. It was painful, but before he could react, he lost consciousness. Inko knew deep down that having her 10-year-old boy walk alone to school was a bad idea. She knew it could only lead to trouble. But Izuku insisted on walking alone, and it gave her more time at work so she could be home earlier and not let Izuku eat alone. It was a win-win situation. She was making excuses. She knew it. Getting a call from school wondering if your child was sick was never a good sign. She called work and excused herself for the time being. She ran through the streets like a madwoman, screaming her child's name. She called the police and her friend Mitsuki, hoping to find Izuku. Her heart raced the whole time, a mix of guilt and terror battling inside her. That day, every pedestrian knew what Inko was searching for, but that didn't help her find her precious child. Night fell and she ran home, hoping it was all a misunderstanding, that her son was just on his way home from school. The pain she felt when 8 p.m. struck on the clock was indescribable. Izuku was never late for dinner. It wasn't uncommon for him to run late from school, but he never let her eat alone. The police left her alone for the night. Mitsuki insisted on staying with her, but Inko knew her son Katsuki was definitely waiting for her at home. At least she still had one son. Dinner was loudly silent. Just yesterday, happy laughter had echoed in the house. Now only deep silence remained. A crushing wave of guilt collapsed on her shoulders. She knew she wasn't the best mother, but having her son kidnapped under her nose was the worst feeling of all. How could she even continue life without her baby? How could she move forward when she didn't know where he was? Was he even alive? The TV muffled her sobs. A muffled voice came from the other side of the room. Izuku woke up in a dark room, the pain from the hit still lingering. He looked around, feeling panic rise in his chest. He didn't know where he was. He subconsciously knew it wasn't some prank from Bakugo and his lackey. He embraced the darkness and positioned himself as far away from the door as possible, the only light coming from the small gap at the bottom. The voices drew closer. Izuku didn't know whether to scream or run, but he stayed still like the worthless child he believed himself to be. The door opened, blinding him. Izuku quickly closed his eyes, afraid of what would come through. A low voice resonated in the room. "This child is Quirkless, right?" Izuku finally dared to open his eyes, coming face to face with a gigantic masked man. He heard a simple, timid yes from someone Izuku couldn't see. The masked man crouched down to Izuku's level, who was still on the floor. "What a wonderful gift. It is truly hard to find such a gem. Congratulations." The masked man smiled at the person behind him, never looking away from Izuku. Izuku felt fear grip him, a chill running down his entire body. He wanted to run, but his body was frozen in place. Tears streamed down his cheeks. The man moved closer upon hearing Izuku's small whimper. Izuku was forced to look at him as the man placed a hand under his chin. A smile echoed through the mask. "Ha! What a perfect child you found me. I love him." It was terrifying. Even the man behind seemed to step back upon hearing that. Izuku closed his eyes in fear, but even with his eyes shut, he could see the owl-shaped mask, which only showed a cruel smile and terrifying brown eyes. He felt the desperate urge to escape, but the man never released his chin, gripping too tightly for Izuku to even move. More tears ran down his cheeks. The masked man studied him, never breaking his gaze. "Where did you find such a perfect child?" Even while speaking, he didn't let go of Izuku. Izuku winced in pain as his skull felt like it was being crushed. He cried out in fear but dared not scream, too scared of being crushed by the man's grip. With a sudden tug, the man forced Izuku to stand up. Finally, Izuku looked at the man behind the masked figure, the kidnapper. The kidnapper didn't seem thrilled by the sight of the boy in such a state. He trembled just as much as Izuku, standing before this terrifying man. "I overheard some kids laughing about a certain Quirkless boy, so I followed them, which led me to him," the man said, uncomfortable by the situation. A quick hum followed from the masked man. "Such a pity people cannot understand what a precious being this Quirkless child is." He looked once again at Izuku, finally letting go of his chin. Once free, Izuku ran to the wall, trying to get as far away from the two men as possible. Strangely enough, Izuku didn't want to escape the room entirely. He was more afraid of the bright, chaotic outside world than he was of being here, trapped with two kidnappers in a dark room. Well, too bad for them, since I get to have my hands on this boy. The man smiled again, his grin so wide it seemed like it would never stop growing. He quietly chuckled, making him seem unstable. He grabbed Izuku by the arm and dragged him out of the room. Despite his protests, Izuku finally let out a small scream, but it was no use. He was pulled outside and into what appeared to be an underground cafe. The blinding light hit him, but soon enough, he could finally get a clear look at the masked man. The man had long blonde hair, a tall and muscular build, and wore an owl-shaped wooden mask. His facial features were hidden, but the plastered smile and dry brown eyes remained visible. He looked even more terrifying in the light than he had in the darkness. Izuku screamed, begging the man to let him go, but was silenced with another blow, losing consciousness once more. After this interaction, Izuku was taken to a facility, one with bright lights encased in cushioned white walls. He was then thrown into a dark room again, a concrete one. The people from this facility must have thought he would be scared of the dark, but it was quite the opposite. He would not tell them, though. He was left alone for a long time there. He didn't mind it. Honestly, Izuku was always told he was a rather special child, even before people knew he was quirkless. He was always crying for nothing, but when a normal child should have cried, he did not. He always looked blankly at the adult trying to appease him, wondering why he should cry, sometimes mimicking a cry to not worry the caretaker. He was an obedient child too mature, too calm, never expressing discomfort, nor did he even cry for something he did not have like a child would. That is the reason why adults did not try to help him after his quirklessness was discovered. He always was a monster. Being quirkless just proved them right. After a while, the door opened, letting the light emerge into the dark room. "Hello, Midoriya." The smiling man was back, wearing the owl mask again. He entered and put his big hand on little Izuku's arm to drag him out of the room. Izuku followed him quietly. He wasn't bothered by the strength the man put on his arm. It wasn't as painful as the burns Bakugo put him through. But what was painful, much more than he ever felt, was the experience these people put him through. They injected a cold product into his blood vessels that made him suffer as if he were being burnt from the inside. Screaming, tearing, scratching followed soon after. Izuku begged and begged again to stop it. He cried for some sort of help, a cry nobody ever responded to. He collapsed, from the pain mostly. The time he woke up, he found himself in the dark room again. This time, he moved as far away from the door as he could, almost merging with the walls. He cried. The pain was still deep inside his soul. He could still see the remains of his cry, his broken nail, his sore voice, and this strange mark on his body, mostly where his arteries and veins passed. He didn't want to leave the warmth of the darkness, but soon enough, the door opened once again, letting the deep bright light enter once more. Light was scary, more than darkness. Much more. The experiment kept going again and again, day by day, week by week, and soon enough a month passed by. His tears were dry, his eyes were unfocused, his voice was hoarse, his skin was red from the blood resurfacing. A broken doll was what the people in the facility played with. He hated these white walls, he hated the softness of the cushion on the walls where he couldn't scratch, he hated these people in white coats, he hated the blinding light, he hated these white teeth of his smiles, he hated his golden hair that seemed white by the light, he hated his owl mask, he hated the door to his comfort room, he hated the strange liquid, he hated feeling pain, he hated everything. They drove him crazy. He was already far beyond repair, broken into a million pieces. But they weren't finished with him. "Oh, sweet Izuku OH, my sweet Izuku." The crazy smile once again. "My masterpiece. I always knew you were the right one, the last one I needed. I knew the first time I saw you." The crazy masked owl man took Izuku by his arm, making him stand up. Izuku was far beyond conscious after the successful experiment. He wasn't unconscious, but responding to the joyful occasion was an impossible task. The man let go of Izuku, letting him fall on the cushioned ground. Twirling and twirling, The man screamed with joy. He was far beyond reason. Izuku didn't know what this monster was talking about, but he hoped it would not cause him more pain. How far wrong he was. What the man succeeded in was the creation of a quirk. He artificially created a quirk for little Izuku. Honestly, Izuku couldn't quite tell how they did it, but they did. That didn't matter now. What mattered was the fact that the owl-masked man was just starting with his experiment, and the pain was far from over. First of all was discovering what type of quirk Izuku gained. By a stroke of luck, they discovered it quickly by burning the hand of Izuku. While screaming with teary eyes, Izuku noticed that his hand was melting and reforming again and again, prolonging his pain. While the people were thrilled by the fact that Izuku had gained a regeneration quirk, he was not. He knew what would follow from it, and he was right. For weeks and even months, he was tortured with various devices. He felt like dying every single time. Even when he thought that not a single tear in his body could be left, he cried even more than before. By now, he knew that when the light emerged in his room, it would lead to one thing: pain. When he did not pass out from the pain, which was quite rare, he was put through the terrible pain of this liquid again. The one that led to all these experiments, the one that gave him his quirk. He did not acquire another one to this day, but these people didn't seem to care too much. When he was finally left alone in peace in his dark room, he would go as far away from the door as possible. Sometimes he would cry, sometimes just look at a random tile for hours and hours, like the soulless child he had become. When the pain from the experiment was too intense for him, he truly felt like dying, seeing his best memories. The only problem was that with each experiment, he felt himself remembering less and less of what he once was. He forgot his life before being quirkless, his childhood friend Kaken, the warmth of his father's hug, the smile of his mother, the thrill he felt every time observing a hero in action, the happiness, the bullying, the loneliness, the betrayal. Everything good or even bad was slowly erasing from his memories. The only last thing he knew of was the pain he felt every day in this cold, comfortable, dark room. Izuku forgot how to smile, how to speak, and everything that identified him as a human being. He truly became an empty shell, a shell who could only show emotion through pain, only communicate through pain, only feel alive through pain. Many days passed like this, at least he heard of it. Time was quite hard to understand without a clock or window. He collapsed less and less from the pain, but when he did, people always complained about how long it would take him to wake up. At least 3 days, but mostly a week. He was dragged from experiment to experiment. Burnt, drowned, crushed, cut, poisoned, shot, bled out, asphyxiated, electrocuted, choked, stabbed, frozen, dragged, drugged, gassed, exploded, stuffed. Everything you could think of, he passed through. Every time getting out of these experiments alive. He hoped that one time he would not wake up from the pain, that his body would stop regenerating, but every single time he would survive. Again and again, almost instantly, meaning another experiment could follow rapidly if he did not pass out. It felt as if he were regenerating more quickly than before. And after a while, another miracle was done. Izuku gained another quirk. The owl man was becoming less and less present with each passing day, which meant seeing his deranged smile less and less. Maybe, just maybe, Izuku could finally hope to sleep without that unhinged grin haunting him. But the day he acquired his second quirk, the man was at the facility almost every day, observing the experiments, trying to figure out what Izuku's new ability was. At first, Izuku hoped they would never discover it, terrified of what might happen if they did. Day by day, the scientists grew more frustrated, and the masked blonde man's initial thrill gradually faded. Anger replaced his amusement, and he took it out on the people in the facility, who, in turn, unleashed their frustrations on Izuku. Sometimes, when their rage boiled over, they would enter Izuku's dark room and beat him until he was left bleeding on the floor. And yet, Izuku never died, thanks to his quirk. It wasn't worse than the experiments, but he was breaking more and more mentally. His supposed place of comfort was no longer one. His rest was disturbed, and he couldn't grasp a moment of sleep. Eating became impossible. This led to another death and another regeneration. By now, he was completely shattered. Crying was useless. Most of the time, he could only watch in horror as his body stitched itself back together, as if nothing had happened. The pain was so intense that he could no longer even shed tears. He was washed out. He wondered, was death rejecting him? Was that why they had given him this cursed quirk of regeneration? Then one day an accident occurred. Izuku was curled up in a ball in the corner of his room when a woman entered. He knew what this meant. Seeing the door open, seeing the light replace the dark, it always led to the same thing. She was here to vent her frustrations, and he was here to be her punching bag. She raised her hand to strike him when Izuku exploded. Literally. Blood splattered everywhere, limbs hung from the walls, and the sharp scent of gunpowder filled the air where his body had once been. The woman no longer had a face. What remained of her was sprawled in a grotesque, bloody shape, her organs exposed, thin wisps of smoke rising from her remains. Slowly, the scattered pieces of Izuku's body began to come together again, like dust being drawn into place. The grotesque noise of raw flesh stitching itself back together echoed through the room. In mere moments, Izuku was whole once more. He was alive. Shocked, he stared at the lifeless corpse before him. A horde of people rushed in upon hearing the explosion. Gasps and horrified retches filled the air, vomit mixing with the growing pool of blood. Screams spread through the facility like wildfire, summoning even those who didn't bother coming. The masked man pushed through the crowd, his expression a mixture of delight, curiosity, and madness. Seeing the woman's mutilated body, her insides on full display, was a delight to him. Oh, Izuku! Oh, Izuku! What a magnificent child you are! How exceptional you can be! Your potential is exponential, and the little taste I've had has made me addicted. He cried out, his cruel smile stretching wide. Meanwhile, Izuku remained frozen, staring at the corpse he had created. The man's gleeful screams burrowed into his mind. Death shouldn't be something to rejoice in. Shouldn't be. Then why was Izuku so relieved that he hadn't been beaten? Why did it feel good to have protected himself? To have killed someone? No, 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 no. He was going crazy. 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 He couldn't be crazy. Not like this madman. Not like the owl. The light was blinding. Everything hurt. He remembered the pain. Then a scream tore through the facility. A piercing, shattering sound. A cry of desperation, of someone reaching for a hand that would never come. The scream of a hopeless fool. The scream of someone who still wanted to believe they were human. A loud click, a trigger being pulled, was muffled by the scream. Then silence. The scream stopped, and so did his heart. When Izuku woke up, he was in an unfamiliar room, similar to the one where the experiments had begun. He didn't want to be there. Panic seized him, and he scrambled backward, crashing into the walls. There was no place to hide, no darkness to curl into. He wanted to scream, but his throat was too raw to produce a sound. So he cried. He cried and cried, flinging himself against the walls, uncaring if his bones shattered in the process. He just couldn't stay in this white room, where the light consumed everything. Then a voice crackled through a speaker. Unconsciously, Izuku turned his gaze to the ceiling, where the microphone was mounted. A shadow, a tiny one barely visible, but it was better than nothing. Izuku rushed underneath it, curled into himself, and hugged his legs, trembling uncontrollably. Izuku, listen to me. The sharpness of the voice made him flinch, which must have been enough of a response. I know how much you hate the brightness of this room, but we needed to put you somewhere while we cleaned up your accident. A sickening smile followed. The masked man was the one speaking. Izuku tried to calm himself, knowing that panicking was futile. But he couldn't help it. For the next hour, the only sounds in the room were his own ragged breathing and the soft scratching of his nails against his skin. A desperate attempt to soothe himself, only to draw fresh blood in the process. When the door opened, Izuku's body moved on its own, his instincts screaming at him to run. The masked man caught him by the arm before he could escape. As always, "Oh, Izuku," he whispered in his ear. "I was so disappointed in you when you reacted the way you did." Izuku froze. Slowly, he raised his head to meet the man's gaze. He could picture the devious smile behind the owl mask perfectly. It was burned into his mind. "If you behave like that again, your beloved dark room will explode as beautifully as that woman you killed." Izuku's blood ran cold. Upon remembering what happened, his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the floor. Tears welled in his eyes, and a new kind of pain tore through him, one he had never felt before. It wasn't like when they had ripped his heart from his chest. It wasn't like when they had stabbed it with toothpicks. No, this was something else. Something far worse. But he didn't scream. Just like the day he was captured. He didn't scream, not wanting to lose his only comfort. The next thing he remembered was being thrown into an experiment, one he had undergone many times before. Being drowned would clear his mind. For hours upon hours, he was submerged in the water tube, suffocating again and again. It helped. It left no time for thinking. Only pain remained. But at night, his mind was consumed, not by nightmares of his torture, but by the woman's bloody corpse. The scent of death still lingered in his memories. Even the darkness of his room could no longer comfort him. He was being eaten alive from the inside, cracking again and again. And when he thought he had hit rock bottom, life proved him wrong once more. Why did he have to suffer like this? Did he deserve it? Was this his punishment? Was it because he had killed someone? Murderers should be punished, right? That must be the reason why. A hollow, despairing laugh escaped his tired lips. He laughed and laughed, finally convinced that his misfortune was justified. He was the worst of the worst, after all. Scratching his head, he slowly spiraled further into madness, his thoughts a never-ending cycle of self-loathing and torment. That night, he didn't sleep. He simply laughed until his voice gave out. The next day, he collapsed from exhaustion in the experiment room. The masked man must have realized that Izuku was on the brink of insanity because, for the next week, he was left alone in his so-called comfort room. A calm mind and a familiar space helped Izuku return to his original state. Not sane, not whole, but no longer lost in madness. Just broken. The kind of broken they wanted him to be. By the end of the week, the masked man was delighted to see his Izuku back. So much so that he even installed a more secure door, ensuring that no one but him could enter Izuku's room. He couldn't afford another crisis. In all honesty, Izuku wasn't particularly glad to have regained his composure, but he was grateful for the secure door. It made him feel safer, at least within these four walls. He clung to the hope that, as cruel as the masked man was, he wouldn't be the one to be physically violent towards Izuku. The nightmares persisted, but they were less intense. And as time passed, the image of the woman's mangled corpse, her blood, her flesh, began to fade, slowly buried beneath the new horrors of experimentation. He still believed himself to be the worst being alive. But at least, in some twisted way, the pain of the experiments granted him a strange sense of peace. It reassured him that he was suffering for his sins. Recently, the scientists had become more focused on understanding his second quirk. Detonating a part of oneself was more complicated than expected. Understanding what triggered the explosions was the hardest part. After much trial and error, they discovered that intense emotions seemed to activate it. The masked man was tempted to put Izuku through another traumatic experience to test the ability further. But he hesitated. Breaking his masterpiece beyond repair would be a waste. For now, Izuku was safe from blowing himself up. But it wouldn't last. Taking it easy, the masked man was starting to get frustrated by Izuku's inability to gain a new quirk. Since his secondary quirk seemed to break his mind, the masked man had hoped to see a third one quickly enough to make up for lost time, but it never came. If Izuku didn't develop a new quirk within the next 5 days, Then the masked man would feel compelled to take the risk of breaking his precious masterpiece. Izuku didn't know what would be best for him, to suffer less. But he hoped for the better. The first day, nothing in particular happened. The same for the next 2 days. On the fourth day, a miracle happened again. Izuku gained his third quirk. The masked man was delighted to hear the news. Coincidence or not, Izuku had awakened this quirk just a day before the deadline. He was still strapped to the table, with liquid continuously being injected into his body, the burning sensation inside him only growing worse when the masked man entered the room. "My sweet Izuku, my sweet, sweet Izuku, once again, you prove to me how magnificent you are." He caressed Izuku's cheek in a simple, loving manner, making sure to show his obsession toward his precious toy. The toy he was caressing was starting to slip away. The past 4 days of relentless experimentation had left Izuku teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. The ceiling blurred, the world spun, and soon, darkness overtook him. The last thing he heard was the laughter of the man in charge. If the devil had sent his apostle to Earth, it would have been this man. Or maybe it was Izuku himself. Like the sinner he was, he deserved this punishment. He needed to atone. He was losing his mind again. He had to stay sane. If not, he would be deemed broken. And he didn't want to know what happened to an ex-masterpiece. When he woke up, the masked man was still there. Just the two of them. In his room, his comfort room. At least here, Izuku knew he wouldn't be hurt. Not right now. Strangely enough, the masked man had gone to great lengths to keep his word about this room being a safe zone. Surely he wouldn't break his own promise. "Izuku." A low, tempting voice. It felt like Izuku was nothing more than prey, caught in a predator's gaze. He instinctively backed away to his favorite corner of the room, eyes filled with fear. "My Izuku, you truly are the most splendid work I've created to this day." It sounded like he was cooing. Slowly, ever so slowly, he approached the trembling boy. He tilted Izuku's chin upward, forcing their eyes to meet. His golden irises staring deeply into Izuku's empty soul. "I know I've been hard on you this past week, but I promise, if that third quirk is as beautiful as your first, then you will be rewarded." He stopped, observing Izuku carefully, gauging his reaction. The sudden tears slipping down Izuku's green eyes were enough to make him continue. "But if it's like your second..." He sighed, letting go of Izuku's chin as his lips curled into a smile. "I truly hope you'll like your new room." And then, as quickly as he had come, he was gone. Izuku was left alone. He hadn't even realized he had stopped breathing. The masked man had never threatened him this closely before, not in all the months he had been in the facility. He looked at his trembling hands and wrapped his arms around himself, trying to stop the shivering. He couldn't. His third quirk was discovered quickly, faster than his first. A fascinating quirk. When a baseball was hurled toward his ribcage, his arm instinctively moved to shield himself. In an instant, his bones tore through his skin. And then he died. There was nothing he could do to stop it, even when bones seemed to pierce through his skin to protect himself. However, the people in white coat discovered that fear, self-preservation, triggered the quirk. There was a pattern between his 3 quirks. All of them were disturbing. All of them were organic. And most importantly, all of them were triggered automatically by specific situations. They asked Izuku to activate one of his 2 secondary quirks voluntarily. He failed. Every time. The masked man was ecstatic. The scientists, however, needed to refine the liquid that had given him these quirks. They had to create a quirk that could be activated voluntarily, one that wouldn't harm its own user. But while they worked, they continued to test Izuku's new ability. If he felt threatened, his own bones would pierce through his skin, forming blades and projectiles. Each time Izuku tried to escape death, his body betrayed him. His humerus would twist into jagged swords. His patella would sharpen into knives. His phalanges would splinter into deadly projectiles. His scapula and clavicle would sprout thorns, eager to impale anything, anyone. It was eerie, as if his bones had a mind of their own. The scientists were fascinated by the countless possibilities. Izuku? He was drowning in agony. He suffered over and over again, as his own body stabbed him from the inside out. This was hell. But the fact that he was getting used to it? That was even worse. Knowing too well the pain that was coming, waiting for it, made it all the more unbearable. He could feel it before it even happened. His bones pressing against his inner flesh, the slow, excruciating moment before his skin split open. The sting of fresh wounds. The way his blood painted his bones red. The way fragments of muscle and ligaments clung desperately to the jagged edges of his skeleton. And then the unbearable reconstruction. His first quirk would force him back together, knitting torn flesh, restoring ligaments, dragging shattered bones back into place. The organic weapon meant to protect him was the one bringing him the most pain. Every time he didn't pass out from the experiments, he felt it all. The recreation of every single cell in his body. He was tired of bringing himself back to life. Again and again. He woke up on the hard floor of his comfort room. He knew he could move, but he didn't. He stayed there, lying motionless in the center of the room. He didn't even bother getting away from the door. It was pointless. In just a few hours, they would come for him. Drag him out of his precious room. He didn't touch his food or his water. He lay there like a drunkard who had collapsed in the streets. Unmoving. Days passed by like that. Dragged from experiment to experiment like a lifeless doll. His body reflected his mind. His skin started to rot from neglect, and his bones grew fragile from inertia. Then, light pierced through his darkness once more. Izuku, that monstrous smile, one that never faded, was there to greet him. It's been 3 whole years since you've been in this facility, but as time passes, I find myself growing more and more concerned. The masked man stepped toward him, kneeling down, observing him like a caged animal. You know, Izuku, I worry quite easily. I hope you understand just how precious you are. But I feel like you can't handle the experiments the way you used to. He tilted his head, golden hair shifting as his smile grew wider. I feel like you're starting to lose yourself. I feel like you're starting to break. At that, Izuku's blank eyes sharpened, suddenly focused on the man in front of him. It has been a while since Izuku responded to something. The masked man chuckled, ruffling his golden locks teasingly. It was fun to finally see a reaction from his masterpiece. I really hope I'm wrong. His lips curled into something wicked. But I must be, right? After all, my precious masterpiece wouldn't betray me like this. Izuku knew exactly what he meant. As always, he threatened to take his only comfort away. He didn't know if the masked man would strip him of his room, driving him insane in the process and destroying his masterpiece. But he didn't want to find out. He couldn't bear the consequences of losing his status as a masterpiece. Not if it meant even more pain. Death was fine. Pain was hell. So, Izuku endured the agonizing process of re-education. He learned to walk again, to pretend he was alive, to act as though there was still a soul in this empty shell. Trying, once again, to piece back together the shattered fragments of something long gone. The masked man was thrilled by this performance. He knew Izuku had died a long time ago. But he also knew that a broken toy that could react was much more valuable than a beautiful toy that just sat still. So they both played pretend. A theatrical performance, carefully orchestrated. Izuku gave the man his spectacle, responding to the experiments. It wasn't difficult, not really. It still hurt like nothing else in the world. Burning alive wasn't something one could ever get used to. But Izuku screamed and cried more than ever, agonizing every day just to please him. His soulless eyes wept, imitating an emotion long lost. Sadness implied the existence of hope. and hope meant there was still something left to break. Pretending was easy when there was no soul to begin with. Months passed like this, then one day the masked man disappeared. Perhaps their little game had become boring. Even fate itself had lost interest in Izuku. No new quirks had manifested for months, leaving his torturer frustrated with the lack of material to work with. The experiments became laxer, less creative, less painful. And soon enough, people started to forget about him entirely. He spent more time alone in his isolated room. No grand door bursting open, no blinding light, nothing. His stomach ached from hunger, his throat burned for water. But Izuku never begged. He simply kept dying, resetting his hunger like it was some twisted game. When air became scarce, he suffocated again and again. No screams, no protests, no tears. Then one day a noise. Yelling, shouts of rage, objects crashing, bodies hitting the walls. Then came the light. The door slammed open, sending a piercing beam into his prison. Izuku flinched, momentarily blinded. He sucked in a desperate breath, lungs stinging, and through the blur he saw him. The masked man. Izuku had forgotten how much he hated that smile. He barely registered the man's words, but from the voices outside, the screams, the begging, the gunfire, he understood what was happening. The masked man had returned after months of absence, only to discover that his masterpiece had been neglected. He was furious. The punishments echoed through the facility. Izuku sat still in his room, staring at the hard bread and stale water they had finally left for him. He didn't pay attention to the gunshots, the desperate pleas for mercy, or the bodies dropping one by one. Then suddenly he was lifted. The masked man held him tightly, whispering apologies with blood-stained hands. Izuku despised being in his arms, but he didn't resist. He knew what would happen if he did. So he let himself be cradled like a precious doll, forced to listen to the man's shaking voice as he wept. He didn't care, because he knew what came next. The cycle would begin again. The pain would return. The fire, the blades, the experiments. And Izuku would be his little plaything once more. And he was right. The experiments resumed with renewed enthusiasm. New faces arrived, more eager, more curious, even less empathetic. The pain returned. Test after test. Laughter echoed as Izuku writhed. Their eyes shone with excitement as his bones twisted into grotesque, organic weapons. Their empty words of admiration meant nothing. Izuku felt like he was surrounded by copies of the masked man. He hadn't thought it was possible, but they devised even more shameless ways to break him. If he could erase his instincts, he would, if it meant keeping his bones inside his body. So he resumed screaming and crying. It surprised him that he even remembered how. And so the play continued. Izuku, the star performer. The masked man, delighted as ever. As if nothing had happened. As if things had never changed. He thought it would stay that way forever. That this would be his life from now on. He never imagined freedom. But one day something changed. The masked man seemed worried. Precautions were even stricter than usual. Izuku was never taken from his room, but people kept coming and going, peeking inside as if to check if he was still there. Hours passed like this, then fighting. Gunfire. Screams. Then silence. Izuku didn't react. He had heard all these sounds before. But then the door flung open. A different light poured in, brighter than anything he'd ever seen. It crawled into the darkness, spreading too far, too deep. It swallowed everything. It swallowed him. He flinched, eyes burning. Then a voice. "Guys, we have a problem." Izuku stiffened. The voice wasn't familiar. New recruit? Slowly, cautiously, he moved to the darkest corner of the room. But the light followed. He stayed still, waiting. Footsteps. More voices. The sound of too many people. Someone stepped forward, kneeling carefully. "Hey there." The voice was gentle. "I'm a police officer." The man pointed at himself slowly, carefully. "And you are?" Izuku stared at him, waiting for the moment he would grow bored. Waiting for the moment he would grab him by the wrist and drag him to the experiments. "What are you doing?" A new voice, lower, rougher. A figure moved through the crowd. A man dressed in black, his yellow goggles reflecting the dim light. "He isn't an animal in a cage. Give him space." The others hesitated before stepping back. The man crouched down, looking Izuku straight in the eyes. "We're here to rescue you." He spoke plainly, calmly. "Can you stand?" Izuku hesitated. The man's gaze didn't waver. He didn't look at Izuku with pity or disgust, just quiet observation. Finally, Izuku nodded. When he stumbled, the man caught him. "It's okay. You can use me as much as you need." And together they walked forward. Towards the door Izuku had never seen before. "This is the exit," the man said. "You're free." "Free?" Izuku stared. Could it be true? He had screamed for help countless times before. No one had ever come. Why now? The man nearly had to drag him forward. And for the first time in his memory, Izuku saw the world. Not the beautiful one, but the real one. The industrial skyline loomed above, thick with smog. Rain pounded down in relentless sheets. The air was heavy, polluted, filled with things he couldn't name. And yet, the vastness, the wind, the cold water against his skin. It wasn't unpleasant. He closed his eyes, savoring it. The man let him. A cough rattled his chest, his lungs weak from years of suffocation. But he didn't care. So this was the real world. He hoped, no, he prayed, this freedom wasn't a lie. Because after this, he could never go back. Izuku was taken to the nearest police station. He never left the side of the dark-haired man. He learned that his name was Eraserhead, at least that's what he heard many people call him. The police station was nothing like what Izuku was used to. It was full of people smiling, like in the facility, but they weren't in strange white coats or standing behind weird glass tinted white. They were lively, and the noise was constant. Not that Izuku minded. If being free meant being able to see the outside world, then it would be all right. Even buildings had these weird things that let people look outside. It was annoying how Izuku couldn't put his hand through, blocking the sensation, but seeing it was enough for now. The man named Eraserhead stepped away from Izuku for a couple of seconds to talk privately with the people in blue uniforms. "I want you to search for any missing child case that matches this one." He pointed at Izuku, looking straight into the eyes of the police officer. The officer nodded, listening carefully to the words of the respected hero. "You!" Eraserhead gently grabbed the arm of a novice policewoman who was passing by. "I want you to take care of this child. Don't stop him. Let him wander around, but never take your eyes off him. Even if you need to go to the bathroom, I don't care. Take him with you. If something happens, come get me." He carefully instructed the confused woman, who eventually nodded and approached Izuku, who was still gazing outside the window. The policeman from before questioned him. "Why her? She isn't suited for this. She's still in training." Eraserhead replied firmly. "The kidnapper of this child was a man. I don't want to lose the little faith he has in me. I don't want him to have a crisis. I'm not taking the risk of him remembering anything traumatic." Understanding his intention, the policeman nodded. They continued discussing what would be done for the child. Izuku stared at the woman, analyzing her. She stood there, a little embarrassed by the intense gaze he gave her, but she said nothing. Soon enough, Izuku returned to watching the window. He didn't move, he stayed still like a statue. But suddenly, the capricious clouds parted, letting the sun shine brightly, free from the wall of gray. Izuku flinched from the sudden brightness and rushed away from the window. The woman, unsure of what had just happened, followed him as he ran, straight toward the room where the cells were kept. Upon seeing the familiar concrete floors and darkness, Izuku ran to one of the cells. The one farthest from the exit, as always, in the far corner. He hugged his trembling legs, his breathing heavy and unstable. His eyes shut tight, remembering the experiments he had endured. He thought it didn't affect him anymore. He thought he'd gotten used to it. But seeing something new, something he didn't want to lose, made him feel again. He regained something he had been afraid of. He regained his fear. No tears came, but he whimpered like a poor sheep in front of a big, bad wolf. The woman didn't know what to do. She stared at the frightened child, feeling a mixture of guilt and sadness. She hadn't hurt this child, but somehow she felt responsible. Overwhelmed, her legs moved on their own, rushing to find the hero who had instructed her. "Mr. Eraserhead," she shouted across the room, grabbing everyone's attention. Eraserhead instantly understood a problem had occurred and rushed toward her, yelling, "I told you not to leave his side." They both ran together toward the holding cells. He suddenly got scared while looking outside and ran toward the cells. "I didn't know what to do." She was panicking, guilt pressing down on her like a weight. She wasn't trained for this. She didn't know how to help. Eraserhead opened the room and looked through every cell, the woman trailing behind him. What he saw broke his heart. Izuku was curled up in a trembling ball in the farthest corner. "Hey, kiddo." He gently opened the cell door. "I don't know what scared you, but it's going to be all right. We won't push you to do anything you don't want to." His voice was calm as he approached, but stopped just a few steps in, giving the boy space. "You can stay here if you want. I won't force you to move, but please know that nothing is trying to hurt you here." He paused. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked softly, not really expecting an answer. But Izuku responded instantly, like the obedient child he had been trained to be. A quick nod, barely visible, hidden behind his arms, was enough. Eraserhead sighed and turned to the woman who had watched the entire exchange. "I'm sorry for yelling. That was my mistake. I shouldn't have asked a novice to care for a traumatized child. You didn't know what to do. It's my fault." He rubbed the back of his head and looked down. He knew this could have ended much worse, but thankfully, it hadn't. The child hadn't had a full breakdown. He checked once more on the trembling boy and left the room. "If he said he wants to stay here, then I won't pull him out of the cell." "What a troublesome situation," he muttered, loud enough for the woman to hear. She still felt bad about what had happened, but at least the situation was under control. A couple of minutes spent in the darkness helped calm Izuku's mind. It was stupid how he had reacted. He should be glad he hadn't been put through another experiment, for now. He should be obedient and avoid causing a scene. If they wanted to, they could take away his freedom or even his comfort room. What if they got rid of both? Why did he have to be disobedient? They would be mad. All Izuku could think about was how much worse the next experiment would be. If he was a bad child, they would punish him more. If going through more pain meant keeping his freedom and comfort room, then it was worth it. Maybe they would take it all away. Maybe the sudden brightness that swallowed up his freedom was punishment. Maybe they erased the gray smoke and the water falling through the ceiling because he didn't acknowledge the woman. Maybe he'd never see his freedom again. Even in his little corner, he could see a small ray of light peeking through. Even that was terrifying. He knew punishment was coming. And maybe, in some twisted way, the masked man had orchestrated all this to test him. Maybe he wanted to see if Izuku would break. It was worse than pain, losing something he cared about without even getting the chance to enjoy it. As he wondered if he would even get food today, the door opened. He heard slow, deliberate steps. It was Eraserhead. The hero crouched down to Izuku's level once again. "Hey kiddo, I know you've already seen me before, but I never properly introduced myself." His tone was slow and careful, deliberate. "I'm Shota Aizawa, and from now on, I'm your guardian. He watched Izuku's face, hoping for some kind of reaction. The child stared at him blankly, anxiously. A guardian is someone who protects you from people who want to hurt you. He said it gently. Izuku looked at him, curiosity flickering in his gaze, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. I'll protect you from all the bad things, and all you have to do is live your life. Live your life? Izuku didn't know what that meant. But if this man said he would protect him, maybe he wouldn't give him back to the masked man? He didn't know if what Aizawa said was true. But if being with him meant more freedom, he liked that idea. And if it was a lie, then he'd just go back to how things usually were. He wouldn't lose anything. So, why hesitate? He took Aizawa's hand and stepped out of his little dark room. The light hurt, but it wasn't unbearable. He didn't want to disappoint his guardian. But then came the next step outside. The brightness that had taken away his comfort. The burning feeling of light on his skin. He wanted the water back. The gray smoke. The wind. But he kept his mouth shut. And stepped outside silent, anxious. Quickly enough, Izuku found himself in front of a gigantic building with a tall, grand door. Inside it was lively. Dozens of much smaller people than the ones in the facility ran around in strange matching outfits. It struck him again, wherever he went, people always wore the same clothes. First in the facility, then in the bright room, and now even here. He couldn't help but look around, wide-eyed. The way everything was divided into light and shadow fascinated him. Darkness clung to the corners, while the brightness nearly stung his eyes. Shadows were everywhere. Everything here was new. The noise, the smell, the feel of the air. He liked it. Was this freedom, too? Before he could process more, he found himself standing in front of another door. Aizawa glanced down at him and spoke gently. Hey, it seems you don't want to talk, and that's all right. But when we go into this room, someone will want to speak with you. Do you understand? Izuku looked up, almost ashamed. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk. He just couldn't. How could he explain that to his guardian? Would Aizawa leave him if he stayed silent? Fear wrapped around him like a net, thoughts spiraling. He began trembling. What if he was abandoned again? Aizawa noticed the shift immediately. He crouched slightly, placing both hands on Izuku's shoulders, steadying him. Hey, don't worry. It's okay if you don't speak to him. I just wanted you to know he might ask a lot of questions, and it can be overwhelming. That's all. I just wanted to make sure you're okay with it. His voice was soft, reassuring. Izuku rapidly nodded, not wanting to disappoint him. Not again. And then they entered. The first thing Izuku noticed was the blinding light behind the desk at the far end of the room. He couldn't see the person seated there. The brightness stung, and instinctively, he slipped behind Aizawa, into his shadow. Hello, Principal Nizu, Aizawa said calmly. A voice responded, one Izuku didn't recognize. Good afternoon, Aizawa. Would you like a cup of tea? Izuku tried to peek out, but the light was too much. It won't be needed. I'm here to speak about the child behind you. Yes, I know, the man interrupted softly. Aizawa didn't look surprised that Nizu already knew. We found him in the facility Maestro was using as a hideout. He seems to have been part of the villain's experiments. We don't know how long he was kept there, but it looks like it's been a while. Aizawa's eyes lingered on Izuku, worry quietly bleeding through his calm demeanor. Nizu took a small sip of tea. And we don't know what he suffered there, do we? His voice held a deep guilt. He couldn't look at the boy. Felt like a failure. No, we don't. But from what I've seen, the child doesn't seem to have any scars. At least we can assume he wasn't physically tortured. How wrong he was. Aizawa turned again to Izuku. Hey kiddo, are you okay? He wasn't surprised by Izuku's reserved behavior. He'd seen it before, but he couldn't help but wonder. The boy hadn't reacted like this with others. What made Nizu different? "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Izuku stared at him, his eyes wide but unreadable. He didn't respond. "Are you scared of Principal Nizu?" Izuku quickly shook his head. "Are you scared of—" Aizawa paused, thinking. There had been something similar back at the police station too. That fear again. What was the trigger? Nizu, observant as ever, spoke up. "Maybe it's the light he's afraid of." Suddenly, everything seemed to place every part of the puzzle together. What triggered Izuku at the police station? Why he flinched when stepping out of the building? Why he was always drawn to shadows? Why he stared at the dark alleys instead of the bright park? And Aizawa felt ashamed. Ashamed that he hadn't seen it sooner. It was right there, obvious even. He looked at Izuku again, this time with heavy regret weighing in his eyes. "Is it?" he asked gently. Izuku hesitated before slowly nodding. His little fingers fidgeted, betraying his nerves. He was scared. Scared that if they found out what he feared, they would punish him with a room full of light. Like before. Even now, some part of him believed that was how things worked. But still, it was better than going back to the facility. Aizawa said nothing but immediately moved. He reached for the blinds and closed them, covering the window and dimming the room. Only a faint, soft light remained, enough to see each other, but no more than that. Izuku finally looked forward. So this was Principal Nizu. A strange white mouse, or maybe a bear or something in between, sat on the chair behind the desk. Small in stature, but the way he looked at Izuku, there was nothing small about that gaze. "I can finally take a look at you," Nizu said gently. There was no judgment in his voice, no coldness. He didn't seem to mind Izuku's earlier behavior. Fortunately. "Can you talk?" he asked. Izuku shook his head. A thoughtful little hum came in response, followed by a calm sip of tea. "That's all right," Nizu continued, warm as ever. "I'll ask some questions. Will that be okay with you?" Izuku nodded. "If you don't want to respond to one of my questions, you don't have to," Nizu added. And so the questioning began. Surprisingly, Izuku didn't seem to mind the countless questions Nizu asked. Even though he couldn't answer most of them, he still tried his best. From what little information Nizu could gather, the child before him had suffered greatly, and for many years. How many exactly, and what he had suffered from, remained unclear. Even the reason behind it all was blurred. It wasn't nearly enough information for Nizu's liking, but he understood the child didn't know either. And then came the final question. A simple one, but one that held deep meaning. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Nizu already knew Izuku couldn't speak. He knew the child would struggle to understand how to respond. But he wanted him to know that someone cared. Nizu knew Maestro, the villain who had kidnapped Izuku, lacked empathy. Having a child in his care was anything but ethical. If Izuku had been dehumanized, Nizu wanted him to know that here at UA, he would finally have the chance to be the child he never got to be. Izuku fidgeted. He knew well enough he couldn't respond. Aizawa sighed and placed a gentle hand on Izuku's head. "It's all right, kiddo. We've talked about this. You don't have to answer." Izuku's heart warmed. He didn't know why, but it felt nice. He was touched by their words, by their gentleness. And for the first time he could remember, something stirred inside him. Something cautious, trembling, and fragile. Hope. Tears welled in his eyes. The only sound in the room was the small, broken whimper of the child. Neither adult said a word. They simply let him cry, let him show his emotions fully, something he hadn't done in a long, long time. He cried and cried, showing his vulnerable self to strangers. To people he hadn't asked for. Help was something he'd given up on long ago. He knew hope could crush him, that trust could betray him. But he let it in anyway, as easily as breathing. He was desperate. Maybe, just maybe, this time he could be free of the masked man. Maybe this time he could truly hope never to see him again. Eventually, Izuku and his guardian left the principal's office. "You don't mind the nickname Kiddo, right?" Aizawa asked, wondering if it might make Izuku uncomfortable. Izuku shook his head quickly. A small smile tugged at Aizawa's lips, which he tried to hide with his hand, embarrassed. Then he observed him silently, trying to guess his age. He looked young, maybe 12 or 13, judging by his height and round face. He wanted to ask but held back, knowing the question might only make Izuku more anxious. The boy probably didn't even know how much time had passed. Aizawa sighed softly, catching Izuku's innocent gaze in return. He smiled again and ruffled the boy's long, curly green hair. The night fell quickly, and Izuku was amazed by the little sparkles he saw in the deep blue sky. He pointed up, curious. "That's the sky," Aizawa explained, noticing his gesture. "And those sparkles? They're called stars." Izuku was mesmerized. He liked the sky, especially the dark version of it, the one above them now. The only other light came from the bulbs on strange metal poles lining the street. Izuku never dared approach them. He stayed close to his guardian's shadow. He soon learned that Aizawa was taking him to his house. Izuku followed, as silent as ever. He knew what the word meant, but he had no real understanding of what a house was. He had so much to learn. Upon arriving, Izuku was overwhelmed by the sight of the place. So many unfamiliar pieces of furniture. Aizawa took off his shoes, and Izuku copied him. Then, a young girl came running toward Aizawa, arms wide open and giggling. "Hi, Eri. Did you have fun with midnight today?" he asked, smiling and hugging the girl. Izuku watched them, almost envious of their closeness. He didn't know what that feeling was, but he wanted it too. They looked so happy. Wait, wanted? Was he allowed to want things? Had just a few hours of freedom from the facility changed him that much? He shouldn't want things he couldn't have. If they found out, he might be sent back. He looked down, ashamed of his feelings. "Who is that?" the white-haired girl asked. "He's a child like you," Aizawa answered simply. The girl looked surprised but turned to Izuku with sparkling eyes. "Like me?" She walked up to him cautiously and extended her small hand. "Hi, I'm Eri." She smiled brightly. Izuku stared at her face, rosy cheeks and deep red eyes that shimmered with kindness. He hesitated, but took her hand. He didn't want to disappoint her. He nodded quickly to let her know he was listening, even if he couldn't reply. She giggled. "I was saved by Mr. Aizawa. Just like you. We're the same." How could someone smile so brightly if they'd been through what he had? It didn't matter. He was just grateful she wasn't angry at him for not speaking. "You can't talk, right?" she asked innocently. Izuku blushed and began to fidget. "It's okay," she said, and gently took his arm, pulling him toward a large, soft-looking chair. "This is a sofa. It's comfortable. Sit here." Izuku did as she asked. She was right, it was comfortable. Not hard like the floors he was used to. He felt his body relax for the first time. Aizawa, watching from the side, felt relief wash over him. He'd been afraid Eri might struggle, or that Izuku wouldn't accept her. But they were both okay. Eri might even become a great help. He smiled to himself and made his final cup of coffee for the day. Eri kept talking even if Izuku never responded. She explained every object in the house and even warned him about potential dangers. She was glad to help someone who'd been through what she had, even if it wasn't much. When bedtime came, Aizawa had to separate them. Eri protested, but Izuku said nothing. He knew which room was his thanks to Eri's earlier tour, so he entered quietly. Aizawa followed, holding back his instinct to turn on the lights. "Make yourself at home. It's yours now," he said, ruffling Izuku's hair. "I won't come in without your permission. You can trust me, unless it's an emergency." He gave a simple goodnight and left. Izuku was alone for the first time since being saved. Felt strange, but he didn't mind. He looked around. A bookshelf, a chair, a nightstand, a lamp, a bed, a rug, all unfamiliar. He didn't feel comfortable using any of them. So he didn't. He sat by the bookshelf, curling up against the wall, just like before. He knew he was supposed to sleep in the bed, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He was nearly asleep when the door creaked open. His danger instinct flared and he curled tighter, eyes fixed on the door. It was Eri. She stepped in quietly, looked at the bed, and sighed, like she'd expected this. She scanned the room, spotted him, and hurried over. "Hi," she whispered with a bright smile, clutching a small teddy bear. "I figured you'd feel weird about the bed, so I came to keep you company. Is that okay?" He nodded his head to say yes, he didn't mind, then patted the floor beside him. She sat down and curled up next to him. He flinched, unused to the closeness. But then he remembered how she had hugged Aizawa. A warm feeling bloomed in his chest. He didn't push her away. Instead, he rested his head on hers. They fell asleep like that. The next morning, Aizawa saw them sleeping and didn't say a word. He didn't reprimand Eri. How could he? She did what he wished he could, reach Izuku in a way words never could. As he made his first coffee of the day, he reminded himself, never scold Eri in front of Izuku. He didn't want to trigger anything. Eri kicked her tiny feet under the table while eating cereal. Izuku tried to imitate her but fumbled with the spoon, spilling food on the table. He tried to hide the mess, but Aizawa quickly reassured him and cleaned it up. The same warmth from the night before returned. Izuku didn't want to cry, but he did. He whimpered like an abandoned puppy. Aizawa and Eri said nothing. They just comforted him, which only made him cry harder. Later, Eri left to get dressed. Aizawa observed Izuku and made a mental note to ask Momo, a student of his, to make him some clothes. "Is it all right if we go somewhere with a lot of people, kiddo?" he asked gently. Izuku nodded shyly. Soon, the three of them were walking toward UA. Aizawa was impressed by how talkative Eri could be. She tried to explain what UA was but quickly got distracted, veering into stories about hero society and pancakes. Still, Izuku seemed to enjoy listening, even if he didn't respond. As they reached the school, Izuku remembered this place. The people in strange clothes. The one called Nizu asking him questions. The one place who will protect him from now on. He followed quietly, sticking close. They stopped in front of a large double door. Voices came from behind, talking, laughing. "Eri, stay with him for now," Aizawa said. "I'll let the class know first, then call you in. Remember, he doesn't like bright lights, so I'll turn them off before you enter. Don't switch them back on." Eri nodded seriously, ready to act like a big sister, even though she was far more younger than Izuku. She turned to Izuku and smiled. Aizawa stepped inside. "Don't worry, I'll take care of you," Eri proudly stated, smiling even though brightly at Izuku. A few seconds later, Aizawa opened the door. The room was dark and quieter than before. Izuku didn't hesitate to enter, seeking refuge from the light of the hallway. Eri followed after him. A deep silence settled. Eri noticed the students of Class 1A. She was familiar with them, but Izuku wasn't. She didn't realize she was holding her breath, worried about how he'd react to seeing so many people at once. Surprisingly, he didn't seem bothered. The students of 1A appeared to be aware of the situation, having just been briefed by Aizawa. Izuku looked around, seemingly more at ease in the darkness. He took quiet note of the students. All eyes were on him. He didn't mind. He was used to being watched. Then a trembling voice broke the silence. A low, uncertain voice. Izuku. Katsuki Bakugu was a brilliant, curious, and energetic child. Sure, he had a fiery temper, likely inherited from his mother Mitsuki, but it never felt dangerous. At least not at first. Katsuki was a natural extrovert. He had many friends at daycare, but none he liked more than Izuku Midoriya, the son of his mother's best friend. From Katsuki's point of view, Izuku was simple. He laughed, cried, and expressed every emotion without shame. Katsuki found it amusing. Teasing him was just child's play. It was strange, though. Izuku wouldn't cry when he scraped a knee or lost a toy. But if a friend got hurt, he cried for them. Some parents called him a monster for being so different. Katsuki hated that. If Izuku was a monster, then what did that make him for liking him? No, that was unacceptable. At 4 years old, Katsuki's quirk manifested. Explosion. The excitement in the daycare was palpable. Everyone praised him, admired him, and his ego inflated with every compliment. Izuku was the first to cheer for him, eyes wide with wonder. Katsuki felt proud in a way he couldn't describe. They talked about becoming a wonder duo once Izuku got his own quirk. Of course, Katsuki would still be the strongest, but he could carry them both to the top, number 1 and 2 heroes. But as time passed, Katsuki's temper worsened. He hated the judgmental looks, the whispers about his attitude. And most of all, he hated how Izuku tried to stop him when he lashed out. Why was he defending them? It only grew worse when Izuku, powerless, kept trying to protect others. Was he trying to be stronger than him? Was that it? No. Katsuki had to remind him of his place. Izuku needed to understand. They were supposed to be on the same side. At first, when Izuku got hurt, it wasn't intentional. But over time, Katsuki stopped caring. If it taught him a lesson, wasn't it worth it? He started to wonder, was this wonder duo dream just a fantasy for Izuku? Did he still admire him? Or had he started looking down on him? Katsuki couldn't bear the thought of losing that admiration. He couldn't lose his best friend. His parents began noticing his aggression. Mitsuki, who understood anger too well, felt guilt settle in her chest. She'd waited too long to seek help herself. She didn't want that for her son. She tried talking to him, but he was too young to grasp what violence meant. Maybe later. Maybe he'd grow out of it. She could wait. It will be fine. Then came the day Izuku's diagnosis arrived, quirkless. Katsuki felt relief. He wouldn't outshine him. He would stay by his side, understand his place. Maybe they couldn't be equals, but at least Izuku wouldn't try to protect anyone else. That same day, Katsuki gave him a new nickname, Deku. It was to show his place, Izuku's rightful place. First, Izuku hated it. But he accepted it eventually. He always did. He thought he found his old Izuku back. The one who stays put in place. Yet Deku never changed. He still threw himself in front of bullies, still tried to protect others. Still acted like a hero. Katsuki was furious. Why couldn't he stay in his place? Why wouldn't he let him protect him? Did he respect him at all anymore? He felt himself losing Izuku. So he hurt him, badly. To teach him. To bring the old Izuku back. The bullying started then. Not just teasing, but real, cruel actions. He didn't realize when the line had been crossed, when he'd become a bully. He wasn't protecting anymore, he was demanding respect through fear. Mitsuki and Masaru tried everything. Punishments, conversations, therapy. Nothing seemed to work. Mitsuki wept at the shame she felt. Inko, her best friend, tried to remain understanding, but both mothers were exhausted. Eventually, they made a painful decision. Izuku and Katsuki would see each other less and less. It was the beginning of the end. Izuku grew isolated. Katsuki grew angrier. Every rare encounter ended with bruises and burns. Izuku would try to hide from his mother. And then came the worst mistake of all. Inko had started working later shifts, and most evenings it was Mitsuki who drove Izuku home, with Katsuki in the car too. It only worsened the already strained relationship between the two boys. Before long, both mothers agreed to put an end to it, deciding it was better for Izuku to walk home alone. They knew it was risky, but at the time they thought it would do more good than harm. Only it didn't. Soon after Mitsuki stopped, the silence between her and Inko grew louder. Katsuki was 9, nearly 10. He still didn't see what he had done. So Izuku walked home alone. And then he vanished. The day Katsuki learned Izuku had been kidnapped, he didn't understand. Not until he saw Inko break down in his mother's arms. Not until he heard Mitsuki cry for the first time. Not until his house, always noisy, always full, became filled only with grief, guilt. A week passed and it hit him. This wasn't like before. Izuku wasn't just avoiding him. He was gone. Katsuki didn't know how to process it. He lashed out even more, but nothing helped. His emotions were out of control. He felt vulnerable, naked, angry, sad. One night, his mother sat him down, and for the first time they truly talked. Openly. About anger, about guilt, about love, about Izuku. That night, Katsuki agreed to therapy. Accepting that someone left is hard, but realizing you were the reason they left is devastating. He started to understand what he'd done to Izuku, to others. He had wanted admiration so badly that he burned everything in his path. The road to healing was long, but he walked it. He got quieter, more aware, still angry, still guilty, but trying. The guilt never left. It clung to everything: food, sleep, relationships. Katsuki felt like a monster in human skin. He no longer dreamed of fame or glory. Now he only dreamed of atonement. If he couldn't bring back one life, he'd save thousands, maybe millions. Maybe then the guilt would lessen. In his final year of middle school, the teacher handed out a form. What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Katsuki stared at the blank page for a long time before writing UA. He hesitated. Did he deserve it? Truly? Around him, the class erupted in excitement, throwing papers and laughing. But Katsuki stayed silent. He had learned a few things over the years. Being feared isn't the same as being respected. Validation means nothing if you lose yourself in the process. Controlling your emotions isn't weakness, it's strength. And guilt never truly fades. But maybe, just maybe, redemption was still possible. Many times he wondered what happened to Izuku. Was he still alive? Still out there? Sometimes, Katsuki even caught himself imagining what he'd do if he found Izuku sitting in some lonely corner. He'd apologize, no doubt. Fall to his knees and cry, beg for forgiveness he didn't deserve. But it didn't matter. Izuku was gone. Katsuki didn't want to think about hollow hopes, those damn hopes that used to burn and bleed. The kind that whispered Izuku was still alive. That he was okay. That he'd come back. But those same hopes made him angry. Because what if Izuku was alive, living comfortably somewhere while Katsuki stayed stuck in guilt and rot? Back then, Katsuki was a mess. Now that hope wasn't gone. Just dulled. Muted by time. Only a bitter aftertaste remained. Middle school ended without much of a commotion. Katsuki walked away from it without a single real friendship. For a short time, he had some fleeting attention, pity disguised as praise, after that incident with the slime villain. But the buzz died off fast, especially when he shut people down with his usual cold glare and sharp mouth. There wasn't much to say anyway. The villain was taken care of. The hero arrived quickly. Even if Katsuki had lost consciousness while trapped and suffocating, waiting for someone to pull him out. Not that it mattered. Whether he was saved or not wouldn't have made a difference. And just like that, those thoughts crept in again. The ones that whispered it'd be easier if no one had shown up. He swallowed hard, jaw tight. He made a note, quiet and practiced, to mention it to his therapist. The same therapist who had spent years helping him peel back the layers of guilt, of regret, of everything he couldn't admit out loud. Not even to himself. It was summer now, just before the UA entrance exams. Katsuki trained like hell. He was obsessive, relentless. The kind of son every Asian mom would brag about. If you erased 2/3 of his life. He came home after 4 hours of training, drenched in sweat, feeling oddly at peace. That peace shattered the moment he stepped through the door. There she was. Inko Midoriya. His best friend's mother. The mother of the boy he bullied. The woman he'd wronged more than anyone. She looked dead. Her once bright eyes were void of light. Her face, lined and hollow. Dark circles bloomed like bruises under her eyes, red-rimmed and tired, clearly worn from years of crying and sleepless nights. Katsuki looked away, disappearing into the bathroom. He couldn't face her. And honestly, she didn't have the strength to face him either. The loss of her son had torn a hole through her life. She kept breathing only because she clung to the idea that he might still be alive. But she wasn't really there anymore. Her soul had left the day Izuku did. She never gave up hope. She believed, no, she knew he was still out there. But she'd lost everything. Her job, her spark, her smile, her son. And Katsuki? How the hell could he ever look her in the eye? It wouldn't be fair. Hell, he didn't even understand how his own mother could still look at him. He destroyed her friendship with Inko, the woman who had always been there for her, even before Katsuki's dad came into the picture. He cried. He cried hard that night. Didn't even come down for dinner. His father left a plate outside his door, like always when Inko dropped by, knowing full well what would happen. By morning it was cold, untouched. Mitsuki knew how much seeing Inko wrecked Katsuki. If he had asked her to stop seeing her, she would have. But he didn't. He even begged her not to. He didn't want to break what little was left of the bond between the two women. Living like this was unbearable. But they did it anyway for 5 long years. Trying to glue back the jagged shards of a shattered vase. The Bakugu and Midoriya households walked on eggshells around each other. Never as close as before. But never able to truly let go either. After that encounter, Inko didn't visit the Bakugas again for the rest of summer. Still, Mitsuki visited her. Then came the UA entrance exam. Katsuki crushed it, aced the written part and blew through the practical. Even saved the ass of some random brown-haired girl with the help of that useless spiky-toothed guy. He soon learned that those two would be his classmates for the next 3 years. Great. Now he was stuck with the loud, spiky-toothed guy and the overly friendly, clingy brown-haired girl. Their names were Ejiru Kirishima and Ochako Uraraka. Katsuki preferred calling them Spiky and Pink Cheeks. He made it clear, at least to himself, that they weren't friends. He didn't want them to get the wrong idea. But as time passed, something shifted. The students of 1A were different from everyone else he had known. Even when he rejected their pathetic attempts at friendship, they didn't back off. They kept talking to him, including him, acting like he mattered. He couldn't understand it. He didn't deserve their kindness, he never had. But even after he told them what he'd done, after he let the ugliness spill out, they stayed. They didn't flinch. They'd seen how he'd changed. They even joked that he should finally learn how to express his feelings better, though he always reminded them that even his therapist had failed at that mission. And at some point, he didn't know when or how, he felt it. A quiet kinship. Not with all of them. Todoroki, aka Peppermint, still had the emotional range of a rock. But the class as a whole had a rhythm he found himself syncing with. Until that day. When Aizawa walked in, shut the curtains, and said he had someone to introduce. Someone who'd been rescued, like Eri once was. From the moment Aizawa spoke, something felt wrong. Katsuki's skin prickled with goosebumps. His gut twisted, flipped. Something deep inside was bracing itself. And then the door opened, and he saw those eyes, staring straight at him. His breath caught, his stomach dropped, and guilt exploded in his chest like a punch to the lungs. He barely heard himself say it, ragged, sharp, and trembling. Izuku. Katsuki drew all the attention to himself rather than the child. He had just screamed the name of a stranger, or rather, the name of that child. He rushed toward him, desperate to hug him, to look at him, to touch him, to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. He didn't think about anything else. Everyone stood frozen, shocked. Even Izuku never imagined hearing his name in this place. The only times he'd heard it before were when the masked man called him, when he wanted something, when he was preparing to who? Katsuki Bakugo. Aizawa suddenly stepped between them, blocking Bakugo's path. Katsuki blinked, startled to find his teacher standing right in front of him. He tried to peer past Aizawa to catch another glimpse of the person behind him, but failed. Moments later, he was pulled out of the classroom. The rest of the class remained in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened in a matter of seconds. Eri stood there awkwardly, glancing quickly at Izuku to make sure he was okay. Izuku, meanwhile, stared at the door Aizawa and the blonde boy had exited through. He looked just as lost as everyone else. Then, a small voice cut through the silence. What just happened? Izuku looked at the girl. Her skin was pink, with little yellow horns poking through hair as soft and rosy as her complexion. No one answered. She stood from her chair, clearly expecting some kind of response. But Izuku didn't have one, not even for himself. And even if he did, how could he communicate it? Minutes passed in awkward silence. Then the door opened again. Aizawa walked in, looking tired, and nodded at Katsuki to sit back down. Bakugo returned to his seat, his head lowered. It was an unusual sight for his classmates. He stole a brief, sad glance at Izuku, but said nothing. Aizawa stood at his desk, scanning the room, his students, and then Izuku. Midoriya, he said. No response. Izuku, he tried again. Izuku's head lifted slightly at the sound of the name they used. Aizawa looked relieved, but also hurt. Izuku didn't know what to do. But then Eri stepped to his side and took his hand. Strangely, it helped. He felt calmer. Is that your name? Aizawa asked. Izuku nodded. Things had just gotten much more complicated, and Aizawa knew it. He ran both hands over his face, elbows propped on the desk. The kidnapping case of Izuku Midoriya, 10 years old. No information, no witnesses, no clues, no leads. And now, 5 years later, here he was 15 years old, alive. Which meant he had survived that place for 5 whole years. Probably tortured. Back before teaching at UA, Aizawa had been involved in clearing difficult police cases, which is why he had strong ties to the department. The Midoriya case had been one of the hardest. It remained unsolved to this day. Aizawa never imagined the missing child could be this one. But now, looking at him, the green hair, the freckles, those green eyes, it was obvious. He'd just changed so much. Still, it felt like an excuse. Even after 5 years, he should have recognized him. He should have. Sensei? A voice spoke from the front row. It was Mashireo Ojiro. What's going on? Aizawa looked at his students, then at Bakugo, who was still watching Izuku like he might disappear. Another sigh escaped Aizawa. That must have been the 10th today. Even for him, that was a record. Pardon me, this child was recently rescued from the villain Maestro. You may have seen it on the news. We didn't know who he was or what he went through in that facility. He paused, gathering himself. Then, looking his students in the eyes. But thanks to Bakugo, we might finally understand. I can't confirm anything yet, But this child will likely be staying at UA for a while. Bakugo's head lifted at that. Izuku, on the other hand, looked even more confused. Class is cancelled for now. I'm sorry you had to witness this. I need to inform Nizu about everything. The classroom erupted into murmurs as Aizawa, Izuku, and Eri left once again. Everyone else remained, confused, invested, and thoroughly intrigued. Later, after the chaos had died down and Nizu had been informed, Aizawa finally collapsed in the teacher's lounge with a cup of coffee. Izuku kept to himself in a dark corner of the room, trying to stay unnoticed. He was panicking, feeling responsible for causing a scene. He curled in on himself, overcome with guilt. Eri tried to comfort him, but he pulled away. She sat beside Aizawa instead, giving Izuku space. Mr. Aizawa, what's going to happen to? She hesitated. Izuku. Aizawa looked down at her, gently running a hand through her hair. We'll inform his mother that he's alive. Then, we'll see. I don't know what kind of future he'll have, but hopefully the best one. He glanced at Izuku, still curled up in the corner. It pained him to see the boy blame himself, despite all Aizawa's reassurances. Mother? Eri asked innocently. Yes, he has a mother. He didn't explain further, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to. Eri didn't ask again. She just sipped her hot chocolate. The lounge was quiet, still, safe. The overwhelming morning faded beneath the calm. Eventually, Izuku started to relax. Being in a corner calmed him. Being in the dark calmed him. But not being punished confused him. Why could he cause a commotion and not be punished? Why could he be selfish and still receive kindness? Why was their care so genuine? Didn't they want something in return? He wished they did. That way he'd know what to expect. At least then he wouldn't be afraid they'd leave. A useful tool is better than a pretty doll. That's what he had learned. As they sat, doing nothing in particular, calm slowly returned until the next commotion. Problematic child, indeed. When Present Mike burst into the room, loud as ever, it startled Izuku, who looked up and screamed. The light, the golden hair, that smile. He vomited. Memories flooded back, experiments, pain, that voice. Not even the return of darkness helped this time. He convulsed. He had never reacted like this before. He hated it. Every second of it. If being rescued meant this, shaking from a single memory, then he would have rather stayed in the facility. At least there, everything followed a predictable routine. No surprises. No hope. No feelings. No betrayal. And then, he blacked out. Present Mike had no idea the kids were in the lounge. Class was supposed to still be in session. When he strode in, all smiles and energy, lighting up the lounge, shouting his signature greeting. He didn't expect a scream in return. He panicked and turned, searching for the source. Aizawa was already rushing to Izuku, yelling for the lights to be turned off. Present Mike did so instinctively. Eri ran to Izuku as well. Mike was confused, but followed. What happened? What did I do? I didn't know. I'm sorry. Tears gathered in his eyes as he knelt beside the convulsing boy. He had never heard a scream that intense, not even from his own Quirk. Aizawa shoved him aside. Not out of anger, but to get space to help Izuku. He gently moved Eri, too. She covered her ears from the screaming, her own tears now falling. Present Mike pulled her into a hug, rocking her gently even though he was still panicking. Then, silence. Aizawa had rendered Izuku unconscious. He lifted the boy into his arms and rushed toward the infirmary. Present Mike remained, holding Eri, both of them trembling. He stroked her hair and back, calming her the only way he knew how. They sat in silence, both of them needing, desperately, another hot chocolate. When Aizawa returned, without Izuku, he sighed once more. At this rate, he was going to break his personal record for most size in a day. He noticed that both Eri and present Mike had calmed down. Honestly, he had been worried Eri would take it badly, but seeing her smile return eased his mind. Maybe he had worried for nothing. Still, he apologized nonetheless, to both her and present Mike for yelling earlier. "It's fine. It was urgent. You had to take care of the kid." Present Mike replied sincerely, running a hand through his blonde hair. "I didn't even realize there were people in the lounge. The lights were off and class was still in session. I should have been more careful. You even warned me the kid was scared of sudden brightness. He must have been really affected." His voice was dejected, heavy with guilt over unintentionally scaring the child. Aizawa didn't like seeing present Mike like this. He was supposed to be the gloomy one, not him. It was bound to happen eventually, and honestly, I should have put a sign on the door. Something like, "Do not shout or flip the lights. We both messed up. Hopefully, it won't leave any lasting damage." He spoke quietly, trying to ease the guilt weighing on his friend's shoulders. Aizawa sat down beside Eri, still feeling bad for leaving her in such a confused state earlier. "Was your hot chocolate good?" he asked. She smiled and nodded. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. Even though he had apologized earlier, he felt compelled to do it again. "It's all right," she said, sounding a little more mature than her age. "It was urgent. I wasn't hurt. It was just a little overwhelming. But I'm strong." She smiled proudly. Aizawa couldn't help but reach over and ruffle her hair. She giggled softly at the gesture. "If you say you're okay, that's good, but remember, if anything does hurt, it's always okay to say so," he reminded her gently. Eri stopped swinging her feet and looked down at the mug still warm in her hands. "I know, but I really am not hurt. I just hope Izuku will be all right." Present Mike turned away slightly, trying and failing to hide his tears. The quiet, heartfelt exchange between the two was just too sweet for his sentimental heart. Aizawa noticed but said nothing. Probably because he was already drained from the morning's chaos, even though it was only 10 a.m. He silently wished the rest of the day would pass without further trouble. He really hoped. When Izuku woke up in an unfamiliar place once again, he didn't like it at all. The soft light, the strange scent of disinfectant, the unfamiliar ceiling. It all reminded him too much of before, of the facility. He quickly recalled the events leading up to this and, after observing the white walls, the simple furnishings, and the faint beep of a nearby monitor, he guessed it was an infirmary. At the very least, he was used to those. In the facility, after every blackout, he was transported to one. Even if things changed, nothing ever really changed. Then, an old lady approached Izuku. He observed her carefully. His body didn't move, but his eyes tracked every step, every motion. Nothing passed unnoticed. He remained alert. "Hi, sweetie," she said softly. "I'm Chio Shizenji. I'm the nurse at UA. Do you mind me approaching you?" She asked it gently, as if talking to a frightened kitten. He wanted to say no. Deep down, he screamed it. But he didn't. It wasn't like adults ever listened anyway. They always asked questions while already expecting a specific answer. She stepped forward. He flinched. She stopped. In all her years working at UA, Chio had developed an eye for the more complicated students. The ones carrying invisible weights. She had never been particularly skilled at handling kids gently. She'd never had children of her own, but she'd seen enough of them trying to act like adults, hiding behind silence and polite nods, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "Kid," she sighed, crossing her arms. "If you want to say no, then say it. It's more problematic when you don't." She clearly felt too old for the nonsense UA threw her way every year. But somehow, this kid, this one tugged at something different. Izuku nodded, eyes lowered. She had seen through him. His poker face, so well-trained, so practiced, was falling apart after just a few days outside the facility. He hated it. hated how human he was starting to feel. How they made him feel. He was scared, terrified, scared of what he could become, of what he already was, scared of being cared for, scared of care itself. The silence returned, wrapping the room in stillness. Izuku's thoughts bounced chaotically. He was overwhelmed. A mess. In a foreign place, surrounded by unfamiliar people who were strangely kind. In a room full of soft furniture he'd never seen before. He was lost. Why was freedom so complicated? He just wanted to go back. Back to the pain, the routine, the silence, the torture. Back to what he understood. Back to where everything started and where, in his mind, it was supposed to end. He didn't know why, but he cried. Again. This time, it wasn't violent. It was a soft, muffled cry, buried in the warm blanket he wasn't used to having. A blanket too kind, too warm, too much. Chio didn't say anything. She stood in the room quietly, awkwardly, letting the boy cry. She wasn't unaffected. She was far from heartless, but she knew interfering would only complicate things. If she knew one thing about children, it was this. They're weird. They're emotional. They're complicated. They're fragile. Even the strongest acting ones, the quietest, the most stubborn, they can break as easily as glass. And she had only heard the surface of what this boy had gone through. She couldn't begin to imagine the rest. So yes, she let him cry. Because sometimes, a broken child needs to empty all those pent-up feelings before they can begin to grow again. Eventually, the sobs faded. A few soft sniffles remained, and tear stains streaked his little cheeks. But he was better. Not fine, not okay, but better. Feeling a bit better? She asked gently, even though she already knew he would just nod. And he did. Listen, kid, she continued. You don't have to act like you're fine here. It's okay. Children have the right to be selfish sometimes. Selfish? He didn't quite know what that meant. But something inside him told him he had to obey. You clearly haven't acted selfish your whole life, she added softer now. Take your time. It's hard to change habits, especially bad ones. Like yours. He didn't really understand what she meant. But once again he nodded, like nodding was the only thing he still knew how to do. She approached him again. This time he didn't flinch. She smiled. A weird little smile, followed by a small chuckle. I like you. You're quiet, she said while casually checking on him. Visit me if you feel fuzzy. I'll welcome you every time. What a weird woman, he thought. Suddenly, Aizawa and Eri entered the room. They had come to check on Izuku to see if he had woken up. What they found was a strange calm. The normally bustling infirmary was quiet, peaceful. Just the old nurse and a crying child wrapped in stillness. Chio had done the impossible. She had calmed a traumatized boy. Even though everyone in the school knew her as the grumpy old lady who complained about children day and night. Aizawa didn't comment. He stepped into the room and cleared his throat to draw attention. Hello, Chio. How is he? He looked at Izuku. Izuku did not return his gaze. Was he intentionally avoiding eye contact? He seems fine, Chio answered, walking toward a chair with tired legs. But, as you already know, he suffers from PTSD. Everything can be a trigger. He reacts strangely to everything. You'll need to find something, anything, familiar to him. It'll help ground him. Aizawa nodded solemnly. He knew most of that already. But hearing it from someone else still helped. Present Mike entered the room behind them, careful not to startle the boy. He reminded himself to not turn on the lights. But even that small movement made Izuku start to tremble. Present Mick's smile dropped. What had he done? Did he cause this? Was Izuku scared of him? But just as he was bracing for the worst, Izuku stopped trembling. He looked at him. Uncomfortable, yes, but not scared. It wasn't terror, just unease. Present Mike let out a silent breath. Still hurt? But at least the child wasn't afraid of him, just reminded of something. The other adults had noticed the strange behavior too. Meanwhile, Eri, innocent and unaware, skipped happily toward Izuku's bedside. "Izuku, how are you?" she asked brightly, climbing up beside him on the bed. "You know there's nothing here that can hurt you." Her joy was contagious, her smile bright, her words unfiltered in the way only a child's could be. Izuku didn't reply, but he didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just listened, quietly, absorbing her energy, her sunshine. She was too bright for someone who had supposedly gone through what she did. And he couldn't help but be drawn to that brightness. While the children sat together, the adults gathered in the corner of the room, still watching closely in case anything went wrong. They were worried about what had happened earlier. Izuku hadn't shown simple fear. Not like the fear of spiders or loud noises. He had frozen. His breath had stopped. His pupils had dilated, his hands trembled. He had looked on the edge of passing out. It was like he saw a ghost. Or something worse, indescribable. Just like that time in the teacher's lounge. That same haunted look, that same fragile panic. It was terrifying to witness. And they never wanted to see it again. But to avoid that, they needed to understand. What had he seen? What was he remembering? And they were sure of one thing. It had something to do with Present Mike. Directly or indirectly. Present Mike hated the thought. Hated feeling isolated. Hated knowing a child might be scared of him. But he quietly stepped out of the room. To protect Izuku. Aizawa turned back to the child. "Izuku," he said gently, "are you scared of the blonde man?" Not very subtle, but Izuku didn't seem to mind. He didn't shake his head immediately. He wasn't scared of that man specifically, but he looked down. Words didn't come. He had forgotten how to speak long ago. So instead, he shook his head. Aizawa exchanged a glance with Chio. She silently nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Then why did you react like that when you saw him?" Aizawa asked. Still not subtle, still hard to answer. Izuku hesitated, then looked at Eri. She tilted her head, curious. A seemingly understanding was created between the two. He looked back at Aizawa. Then he pointed at his hair. Then at his mouth. Eri blinked, imitated him, wondering what it meant. He repeated the motion, this time pointing at her hair and mouth. She giggled. Then stopped. "Did the bad guy have blonde hair too?" she asked softly, like how she saw her own fears in every brown-haired man. Aizawa froze. So did Chio. And Izuku nodded. Slowly. Of course it was the hair. Maestro. Then, why did you stop trembling after a while? Aizawa's voice broke the silence once again. Izuku pointed again at the mouth, this time mimicking a smile. Izuku didn't smile, never had. Because smiling only came when someone got hurt. That was what he had learned. He knew a smile didn't always mean pain, like the one Eri wore every time she was with him. But he never quite understood what it meant. For him, smiling meant danger. So imitating one was the only thing he could do. Imitating his smile. Maestro's smile was the last thing he saw before pain. The smile, that horrid smile. Masked or not, that grin was always there. That was what Izuku remembered. That was what he feared. And Present Mick's smile had reminded him of that. It all made sense now. Aizawa felt stupid. Every time this child reacted, it took them too long to understand. Was he truly the right guardian for this child? He wronged him so many times, but no self-doubt. He had made a promise to this child. He would protect him. And he would keep that promise. If he wasn't enough, he'd become enough. Now, at least they knew one more trigger to avoid. Every blonde hero, every teacher who had the habit of smiling too brightly, they were all told to stay far from Izuku. And if they saw him, they were told one simple rule: don't smile. Present Mike received the news with a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow. He wasn't the one Izuku feared, but he also couldn't approach him, couldn't comfort him, couldn't be near the boy who might someday need help. But for now, it would have to be enough. At least he hoped it would. Amid all the commotion, a black car pulled up hard in front of UA's gates. The door slammed open, and a woman stepped out fast. No hesitation, no pause. Her eyes didn't move, just fixed on the gate like the rest of the world didn't exist. Her face was stiff, pale, her mouth tight like she was holding something back. Fear, maybe, or hope. She looked like she hadn't breathed in years. After her son disappeared, Inko Midoriya didn't just grieve, she died. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, she died. Everything that made her human, everything that tethered her to this world, vanished the moment Izuku didn't come home. There's no preparing a mother for this. No pamphlet, no guide, no therapy, no God. No universe could ever prepare a mother for the silence of a child's empty room. And unless you've stood where she stands, fists clenched around hope so fragile it cuts, you will never understand the agony of it. She didn't even want a miracle anymore. Just a corpse, just something to bury, a hand, a shoe, anything. Something to hold so she could finally let go. So she could die with peace instead of screaming inside every night. If they had to leave this world, then at least they could have left it together. But the world didn't give her that. Instead, it cursed her with hope. Hope is a poison, a venom that drips slow, a cruel little whisper. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe, maybe, maybe. She lived trapped in that word. The police had nothing. No blood, no sightings, no whispers, no camera footage. Nothing but empty apologies and coffee-stained reports. It was like he'd been erased by the hands of God. Like her baby boy never existed at all. Now she sat in a suffocating apartment that didn't feel like home anymore. It was hollow like her chest. The walls didn't echo with laughter. The air didn't carry his voice. The silence wasn't quiet, it was loud. Deafening. The TV rambled in the background. Some hero being praised for rescuing someone. Some villain getting locked away. Why? Why couldn't those goddamn heroes save her baby? The one who believed in them more than anyone. Who worshipped them. Who cried over them. Where were they when it mattered? She broke down again. Same as an hour ago. Same as yesterday. Same as every day. Her sobs racked through her chest as his favorite dish sat cold and untouched on the table. She'd prepared 2 plates. As always. Dumbly, faithfully. The tablecloth soaked with tears. Again. 8 o'clock. He was always home by 8. He never missed dinner. But for the past week, he had. And still she waited. Because what else was she supposed to do? Not wait? Every day, she dragged her dead soul to the police station. In the beginning, they cared. They really tried. But as the weeks bled into months, they stopped looking her in the eye. Stopped giving updates. Stopped trying. Now she just sat there, begging them to believe her. To not file him away as just another case. He was her everything. Couldn't they feel that? She could. He was still out there, somewhere. She didn't care where. She'd dig up every inch of this cursed world to find him if she had to. Because the only thing keeping her alive was that need to know. Inko never complained before. Her life was hard. Sure, shitty job, low pay, a husband who ran away the moment their son was deemed useless. But she never asked for more. She didn't need more, because she had him. And she always thought, once Izuku was grown, financially stable, living his life, then she could go. She could rest. Leave knowing she'd done her job. But now? Now he was ripped away, ripped out of her arms, her life, her soul. And the world expected her to just live through that? Nothing mattered anymore. Not food, not friends, not her own body. She forgot how to breathe without guilt. Every night, she saw him in her dreams, begging her to save him. And every morning, she woke up to the realization that she hadn't. If she hadn't worked late that day, if she had picked him up, if she'd called Mitsuki, if, if, if. She knew letting a 10-year-old walk home alone was dangerous. She fucking knew it. And she did it anyway. Why didn't she stop him? Why didn't she say no? Was this God's punishment? Fine. Let her suffer. But bring him back. Please. She cried. Again. Like she hadn't just screamed her throat raw hours before. The only time she remembered she was still alive was when Mitsuki came. Mitsuki, of all people, the mother of the boy who bullied Izuku relentlessly. Her best friend. Her only friend. She would clean up, cook, run baths, feed her like a broken bird. Always setting 3 plates just in case. Just in case he came home. And Inko let her. Because she couldn't stop her. Because she didn't care anymore. She didn't count days. She didn't know what month it was. Every minute without Izuku was a lifetime. The only thing she did, if you could call it that, was search. She wandered the streets like a ghost. Filthy. Hollow. People avoided her like she carried a disease. And maybe she did. Maybe grief was contagious. Sometimes the police would find her, bring her back home. One time, Mitsuki found her 3 days after she disappeared. She hadn't even known she was gone for that long. She wouldn't be alive now if it weren't for Mitsuki. But Inko never said thank you. Couldn't. Sometimes, in a rare lucid moment, she tried to apologize. She'd eat a little. She'd talk a little. She even smiled once. Until she saw him. Katsuki. The boy who made her son's life hell. The boy who ruined everything. 10 years old and already a monster. Because blaming herself wasn't enough anymore. She needed somewhere to put the rage. The guilt. And Katsuki Bakugu was the perfect container. Why did he hate Izuku so much? Why did he torment him? Because of a quirk? Because of society? Because he could? Why? Izuku was kind, polite, sweet, bubbly, hers. Her only child. Her everything. And Katsuki got to live? Got to laugh? Got to run around carefree like he hadn't taken a piece of her soul and spat on it? She fantasized about killing him. God, she wanted to. But jail would mean missing Izuku's return. And if he ever came back and she wasn't there? No. She couldn't. She swallowed it. The rage, the hate, she buried it deep. Mitsuki must never know. Bills piled up. Rent loomed. She didn't care. But she couldn't lose the apartment. This was the only place Izuku knew. If she left, how would he find her? How would he find home? So Mitsuki paid. Of course she did. Inko didn't even ask. Days bled into months. Months into years. No news. No leads. No one cared anymore. The police closed the case. Unsolved. Forgotten. Another missing kid. Another broken family. No one cared about the green-haired woman who still came to beg every week. Who still believed. Who still knew. They rolled their eyes. Whispered. Avoided her. Only one person kept trying Eraserhead. A hero who hadn't let go. But even he was human. And the world didn't give him time. Not when he had students to teach, lives to save, mysteries to solve. Eventually, even he stopped showing up. And now, Inko was truly alone. Not just at home, but in the search. In the fight. In the war for her son's life. She was alone in the grief that never ended. She hadn't showered in 4 days. She couldn't remember the last time she slept. Her body ached, But she didn't notice. Her throat was raw from screaming into her pillow, her knees bruised from collapsing over and over again in front of that shrine of photographs, toys, and Izuku's tiny All Might figure. Clutched so tightly, the plastic began to crack beneath her grip. She didn't leave the apartment anymore. The curtains hadn't moved in days. What was the point of sunlight when your son was gone? What was the point of anything? The phone rang. It hadn't rung since day one. She didn't move at first. Didn't even flinch. Just stared blankly at the sound like it was coming from another universe. Then it rang again. Her body moved on instinct, slow and brittle. Her hand shook so hard she nearly dropped the phone when she picked it up. "Hello." Her voice came out hollow, unrecognizable even to herself. There was a pause. "Inko Midoriya?" The voice on the other end asked, gravelly, tired, professional. She gripped the phone tighter. Her heart didn't race. Didn't know how anymore. "Yes," she whispered, barely. "This is Aizawa Shoyuta Eraserhead. I'm with UA High School. Hero course." Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes blinked but didn't process. "A hero school? Why?" I don't understand," she croaked. There was another pause. Then the voice softened just a fraction. A warmth hesitant. I believe your son is here. At UA." Silence. Pure, empty, silence. Her legs gave out. The phone dropped but stayed connected. She fell to her knees. Her mouth moved but no words came out. "Izuku." She finally breathed, like the name itself would vanish if spoken too loud. "We aren't quite sure yet, but," Aizawa says, softer now. "Yes, it's Izuku." She couldn't hear anything after that. Just static. Just her own heartbeat slamming in her chest for the first time in days. A sob rose in her throat, violent and unfamiliar. Cracked through her like thunder. She screamed. A sound so full of grief and relief and disbelief it made her own ears ring. Alive. Her baby was alive. "Where is he?" she cried, gasping. I need to see him. I need to go to him. Now. Please, I understand." Aizawa interrupted gently. "He's safe, but he's not well. He hasn't spoken. He flinches when lights get near. But he's here. He's alive." She sobbed harder. Her entire body folded in on itself. Alive, alive, alive. That word shattered her. Hope hurt worse than grief. "And still, she whispered, thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over, like a prayer. Like she was being reborn. After a long while of whispered conversation between Eri and Izuku, voices trembling with the effort of forming fragile connections, Aizawa finally interrupted, his tone low but firm. "Izuku." He waited, standing there with that immovable patience only years of experience could build, until Izuku lifted his head toward him. His green, now more muted, eyes stared up at him blankly. "I contacted your mother. She's probably already on her way here." He spoke carefully, every syllable slow, like explaining something to a scared animal ready to bolt at the first wrong move. And yet, he saw it. The flash of confusion. The absence of understanding. Izuku didn't register what he said. And what Aizawa feared most, that terrible heavy certainty, settled into his chest like a slab of stone. Izuku forgot. Forgot his life before Maestro took him. Forgot her. He sighed, and caught Chiyo's grim, knowing eyes. There was nothing to say. A soft voice broke the heavy silence. "His mother will come?" It was Eri, her small face tilted up, so hopeful, so earnest. Aizawa's throat tightened. After all Eri had endured, after all she had lost. And yet she still asked with such gentle belief. "Yes." The word caught slightly. He forced it out. He cleared his throat, composing himself as best he could. hearing the telltale hurried footsteps approaching Yue's gates. He wouldn't let Eri see what might happen next. She was too young, too fragile still. Go play with present Mike for a while, Eri. Izuku needs some privacy now. Eri, obedient as always, gave a small nod and rushed from the room, her hair bouncing slightly with the movement. Aizawa watched her go, an ache deep in his heart. She didn't even question it. She trusted him. She trusted him to protect her from the sight of a mother breaking in front of her child. The air grew heavier once Eri left, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Izuku looked at Aizawa, a slight frown on his too thin face, wanting to ask something, anything, but the words never came. And then, the door slammed open with a crash that made everyone flinch. Inko Midoriya stood there, disheveled, almost unrecognizable from the soft, cheerful woman in the photos. Her hair clung desperately to a mess of a ponytail. Dark circles underlined her bloodshot eyes. Her clothes were crumpled and thrown on, nothing matched, but none of that mattered. Her eyes, her eyes, locked immediately on the boy lying in the infirmary bed. Izuku! She whispered, as if she could breathe life back into him with just his name. Izuku! She cried again, louder, desperate, raw. But Aizawa moved faster than she could. Before she could cross the room, before she could throw herself onto him, he gently but firmly blocked her, steering her out into the hall. "What are you doing, Eraserhead?" She hissed, almost unhinged with fury, the rage of a grieving mother who had tasted hope again. If she had been thinking clearly, she would have never dared speak to a pro-hero like that. But she wasn't. She was a mother first. Aizawa didn't flinch. He understood. "Miss Midoriya," he said, voice softer than steel should allow. "I know you miss your son, but we need to be sure. Even if this child looks like Izuku Midoriya." She didn't let him finish. Her glare could have leveled mountains. "Eraserhead," she said, her voice trembling. "I know my son, even if his hair is dull, even if his cheeks have hollowed, even if his light has faded from his eyes. I know. I combed that hair every morning. I kissed those freckles goodnight. I know the way his hands fidget when he's nervous. You don't have to tell me to be careful. That," she pointed tremblingly at Izuku through the window, "that is my son. No one could argue with that. No one dared." So he let her pass. He watched as she entered the room, quiet now, but filled with an unstoppable force. Her knees almost buckled seeing him up close. 5 years. 5 years of nightmares, of empty beds, of lost birthdays and missed smiles. 5 years of an open wound that had never closed. She crossed the room trembling, like every step would wake her up from a cruel dream. Her hand, shaking, lifted and brushed his hair from his forehead. Izuku flinched. He flinched away, cut through her like a knife. But she didn't stop. She pulled him into her arms, slowly, like trying not to spook a wild animal. He didn't hug her back. His arms hung uselessly at his sides. He didn't even speak. But she held him anyway, because that's what mothers do. They hold on even when everything inside them shatters. They hold on because hope is stitched into their very bones. Izuku sat there, frozen. He didn't know what to do. This woman, she was familiar and yet terrifying. He wanted to move, to respond, to be the boy she thought he was. But all he felt was numb, empty. He forced himself to nod, stiff and mechanical. But it didn't matter that he didn't recognize her. It didn't matter. She told herself that over and over until the words lost meaning. She could wait. She would wait. Wait for him to come home. Wait for him to live again. Wait for them to be a family again. She could wait forever if that's what it took. It didn't matter that he didn't know her. It didn't matter that his empty eyes looked straight through her. It didn't matter that she remembered every laugh, every tear, every scraped knee, and he remembered nothing. It didn't matter, because he was alive. That was enough. It had to be enough. Until it wasn't. She broke. She broke in a way she didn't know was possible. She cried until her body shook, until her voice was nothing but a raw, gasping thing. It's one thing to find your son. It's another to realize he's already gone. All the nights spent praying, the years of waiting, the memories of holding his tiny hands, his baby smile, they all came crashing down, burying her alive. She knew it was stupid to believe he'd still be the same little boy after 5 years. She knew. She should have been happy. She was happy. But it still shattered her. It hurt. God, it hurt, to know she remembered everything, and he remembered nothing at all. Aizawa, from the doorway, watched the scene unfold with heavy, tired eyes. He thought he had prepared himself for this. He hadn't. Seeing Inko Midoriya break apart in front of her own son, it was worse than any villain he had ever faced. This was real evil. Not flashy powers or grand declarations. Real evil was the quiet theft of time, of memories, of family. When Inko finally let Izuku go, she stared at him like memorizing him all over again. 5 years lost. 5 years never to be returned. She kissed his forehead, trembling. Izuku, it's me. It's Mom. I'm here, baby. I'm here. I missed you so much. Her voice broke entirely. And in that moment, Aizawa made a decision. He made a promise to himself, one he would never break. Later, outside the infirmary, as Inko wiped her face raw with a tissue, he stood next to her. She looked at him, steel in her exhausted gaze. Aizawa made a proposition to keep Izuku at UA, where they could protect him. It was mercy. It was cruelty. Because it meant he wouldn't come home. Not truly. Not the way she had dreamed of every sleepless night for 5 endless years. Inko understood before the words even finished leaving his mouth. She couldn't keep him. Not in the place where he had been stolen. Not in the house that had failed him once already. She couldn't chain him to her side just to soothe her own terror. She couldn't pretend that love alone could shield him from the world. And if he stayed with her, she'd live with her heart in her throat, fearing every moment he was out of sight. Worse, she knew there would be moments when he would need help, real help, and she would have nothing to offer him but trembling hands and helpless prayers. So Inko Midoriya, who loved her son more than she loved her own life, did the hardest thing a mother could ever do. She let him go. And she asked only one question, the only question that mattered, when everything else had already been lost. Will he be safe? She asked. No pretense, no ceremony. Only the raw fear of a mother who had already lost too much. Aizawa knew Inko Midoriya. Or at least he liked to believe he did. He had seen the fractures beneath her brave face, how grief hollowed her out when her son vanished without a trace. He remembered how she would clasp her hands tightly in her lap during questioning, her knuckles bone white, her voice barely a whisper. He had tried to find her child. For 3 long years he had tried, combing through dead ends, false leads, and empty promises. But when another case emerged, a girl even younger, even more fragile, he had been forced to choose. Forced to move forward to save what he could. And he did save her. That small, broken child now smiled freely at his side. Still, guilt gnawed at him. The knowledge that while one life was rescued, Inko Midoriya had been left behind to drown alone in her grief. Now, facing her again, Aizawa made a quiet, unshakable promise to himself. This time he would not fail her. He would not leave them behind. Yes, Aizawa said, steady. I promise. He would not let Izuku be lost again. When Inko returned to say goodbye to her son, just for now, just until she could come back, her hand brushed his cheek, so gentle it was almost a ghost of a touch. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, then whispered, "Take all the time you need, my baby. I'll wait. I'll always wait." And then she left. silently, like she had never been there at all. But the ache of her absence stayed. Izuku sat there, feeling the cold crawl up his spine. He didn't understand. He wanted to, but the world felt too big, too loud, too sharp. Chio, pretending to busy herself cleaning, finally spoke. "You all right, kid?" He nodded, automatically, because that's what he thought he was supposed to do. "You sure?" Her voice was so careful, so soft. He hesitated, then nodded again. Lie after lie after lie. He didn't know how to tell the truth anymore. She sighed, giving him a small smile he barely noticed. "You can show it, you know? Even if you can't talk, you can show it." Her words floated around him, half understood. And yet something in him stirred. Maybe if he dared to be a little selfish this time, just a little, maybe they wouldn't punish him for it. Maybe. Aizawa leaned against the wall outside, his eyes closed briefly. He thought of Inko Midoriya's tear-stained face, of the weight of the promises he had made. Nizu and the others would question him, would scold him, but he didn't care. He couldn't throw this boy out into the world yet. Not when he was this broken. Not when the world had already failed him once. If keeping Izuku Midoriya safe meant bending a few rules, he would bend them until they snapped. He opened his eyes, tired but resolved. If they needed a reason, he would find one. Quirk or no quirk, Izuku was staying. As long as he needed. As long as it took. Because once, long ago, Izuku had been an innocent child. And maybe, if they were careful enough, if they were patient enough, maybe he could be again. Aizawa had seen this coming. Keeping the boy at UA had never been harder. The child had a living mother, which meant technically, he had no reason to remain at the school, even with Aizawa pleading that he needed treatment. He had even played the card of the quirkless, discarded child, warning that outside UA, Izuku would receive no care, no real protection. But it wasn't enough. Now that the world knew the truth, that the boy was Izuku Midoriya, there was pressure from all sides. Nizu knew. The press knew. Every pro-hero in the country knew. And UA was no longer the place for him. Not officially. But Aizawa wasn't the kind of man who gave up. He'd gone to Nizu and argued relentlessly. He'd even gone as far as to mention Nizu's own past. A risky move. He saw the flicker of pain on Nizu's face, the shame carved into every twitch of his whiskers. But Nizu's hands were tied, both by the Hero Public Safety Commission and by the scrutiny of the public. Still, Nizu hoped Aizawa would find a solution. He, too, understood what trauma did to someone, especially someone who had been kidnapped, experimented on, treated like a tool. And he understood the quiet cruelty of being quirkless in a world built around power. So Nizu gave him time. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find something, anything, that would convince the commission and the media to let Izuku stay. Now, almost 2 weeks had passed. It was Thursday. Aizawa was exhausted, juggling being a teacher, a pro-hero, a temporary guardian, and a man desperately fighting a system designed to throw away children like Izuku. But he kept going. Eri had just left for her special education program. Izuku, too, had gone to his therapy session. Both of them were beginning to bloom at UA, and their bond with each other was growing stronger each day. Aizawa saw the change, tiny but steady, and it made him more determined than ever. He would not let Izuku leave. When Inko came by for her weekly visit, Aizawa knew he should have told her. He should have explained that her son, the boy she had entrusted to a stranger's care, might soon be sent away again. But he couldn't. He couldn't betray the trust she'd given him, not when it was so fragile. Not when Izuku was only just beginning to heal. So yeah, maybe it was a dumb decision. But Aizawa kept her in the dark. At least Izuku seemed happy, or something close to it. Eri still insisted on sleeping beside him, curled up on the floor where he had a pillow now, and a blanket warm enough to ward off the cold. Aizawa had tried to get Izuku to sleep in a proper bed, but he understood. Kids like him didn't trust comfort. Not yet. But time would help. In the past 2 weeks, Izuku had started to get used to present Mike, even if it was hard to be in the same room. Yamada had learned not to smile too widely around the boy. A soft smile was okay. Anything more made Izuku flinch. He was even starting to respond, sometimes, to the name Midoriya. A small turn of the head when it was spoken. Rare but real. Aizawa clung to that progress. Life, for once, didn't feel like a battlefield. Not completely. It was hard. It was exhausting. But it was good. Until it wasn't. Because nothing ever stayed quiet for long when you were trying to help a traumatized child in a school full of loud voices and careless adults. Izuku had just finished his therapy session. He remembered what Aizawa had told him about the woman. That she was here for him. She would listen or she wouldn't. That choice was his. She would never push. At first, he had crouched in a corner, eyes fixed on her every move as she shuffled papers, occasionally offering a soft smile without ever starting a conversation. She would greet him and then go silent again. Eventually, he moved. From the corner to the wall. From the wall to a chair. He still didn't speak. But he stayed. And that was more than anyone had expected. The room itself helped, the quiet shuffling of papers, the ticking of the clock. The smell of clean spring air drifting in through the open window. The light was never too bright. It didn't burn. He even found himself kicking his feet sometimes, letting his guard down just enough to look around instead of watching her every second. He tried picking up a pen, mimicking her motions. It was hard at first, but she showed him. Patiently, kindly. He felt safe. And that, for Izuku, was a miracle. The therapy room didn't lead to experiments. There was no pain, no flashing lights, no twisted grins. He wasn't dragged away. He wasn't punished. He was just allowed to be. And today felt like every other day. He was going to show Eri that he could hold the pen now properly. After therapy, he'd go to his special class where he was learning sign language, how to read, how sounds worked. He even liked it. For the first time in what felt like forever, life was fun. Eri listened when he showed her what he'd learned. The woman called Mom had hugged him and told him he mattered. Aizawa ruffled his hair, never forcing anything. His therapist never broke the silence, even though he once heard her voice outside the room. It shocked him. She could speak. But she never did unless he wanted her to. Felt like freedom. Sometimes he even thought the nightmares might leave. That the phantom pain in his bones might fade. He walked the halls like a grown-up, proud. The hallway between therapy and his class was always dim, a comfort. A shadow he could melt into. He reached the door. Then he heard footsteps. He turned instinctively. And then, "Hello, young one." Everything shattered. No, it was him. Him, him, him. He was back. Back for Izuku. Back to finish the nightmare he had started. To drag him back. To make him pay. Why now? Why did he let his guard slip? Why didn't he run? He was coming for him. Coming to tear him apart. Back to where the agony was endless. Back to the place where pain was the only constant. Where every smile was a mockery, a threat, lurking in every corner. Where the light seared through his soul, blinding, burning, never letting him breathe. Where laughter never stopped ringing in his ears, twisted and mocking, even in his dreams. Back to the beginning. Back to the hell he thought he'd escaped. Back to where everything fell apart. Back to where everything would end. He didn't hear the voice. He didn't see the hallway. He didn't know where he was. His mind had snapped like a wire stretched too tight. Reality shattered into fragments, white lights, cold restraints, muffled screams, white, white, white. His body trembled violently. But he wasn't in control of it anymore. Everything felt wrong. Too loud. Too bright. Too close. His breath caught, no, it vanished. Like someone had reached into his chest and crushed his lungs. His mouth opened, gasping for air that wasn't there. Nothing came in. Nothing came out. His body began to curl in on itself, nails digging into his scalp, blood already blooming under them as he scratched at his head, like he could claw his thoughts out. But it wasn't enough. Something deeper broke. And his quirk answered. A sickening crack echoed from within his body. Then another. Then another. He didn't know it was happening. He didn't feel it the way someone should, no time to scream, to react, to stop it. His body just ripped itself apart. Bones snapped, split, twisted. A horrid sound, like meat tearing off the bone, rang out as his shoulders convulsed, shards of white bone bursting through his back like spears. Not clean, jagged, wet, dripping. The skin around them tore open like fragile paper, blood spraying in a high arc across the tile. His left arm broke at the elbow. Not dislocated, not fractured. Shattered. Fragments pushed their way through the skin, raw, pale, pulsing, reforming outside the flesh, twisting like knives into unnatural weapons. Muscle spasmed as more bone forced its way out, gouging through tendons, warping the arm into something inhuman. His ribs split outward, some of them blooming like jagged petals from his sides, slicing the fabric of his uniform, glistening red. His spine cracked with a series of wet pops, forcing his body into a twitching arch, a violent and unnatural shape. He convulsed again, arms trembling, fingers contorting. Some of them broke backward, like they didn't belong to a human body anymore. The skin stretched thin around the transformation, then split entirely. More blood, too much blood. Izuku didn't notice. He was past noticing. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't there. They were glassy, unfocused, dilated, like prey mid-mauling. Mouth agape, breathing wet and shallow, foam collecting at the corner of his lips. The muscles in his face twitched in pure panic, but not a sound escaped him. Not a scream. Not a plea. Not a word. Just pure, soundless horror. His body was screaming for him, bleeding for him, twisting itself into something lethal, all while his mind curled into a corner, small and helpless. The bone spikes kept growing, more along his shoulders, his thighs, the back of his neck. His entire frame a quivering, bleeding mess of jagged protrusions, dripping in his own blood, pulsing faintly with his terrified heartbeat. And still, he didn't fight it. He couldn't. He didn't know where he was, who he was, what was happening. There was only terror, and the unbearable pressure of becoming something he couldn't even comprehend. His body collapsed onto the ground again, a shivering wreck, breath stuttering in and out in pitiful, barely there rasps. His mouth moved. Silent. Just one word. One tiny word, over and over, lips barely forming the shape. No! All Might stood frozen, his eyes wide in disbelief, as the scene before him twisted into something grotesque, surreal, something he could never unsee. You don't witness a child tearing himself apart every day. His stomach churned violently, the remnants of his last meal rising in his throat, a sharp, bile-tainted wave of nausea threatening to choke him. The images from moments before slammed into him. He saw the child, small and fragile, his body collapsing inward as if his very skin and bones were betraying him, ripping and tearing. This isn't possible, he thought, his vision blurring. Now he remembered that child, the traumatized one who had been shattered by fear, recoiling from the sight of blonde hair and smiles. The boy's screams echoed in his ears, drowned by the horrific, sickening sounds of bones snapping and skin shredding. He could smell the blood, the stench of it thick, metallic, overwhelming. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. Then the vomit surged up, uncontrollable, spilling across the cold floor in a sickening splash of red and bile. His eyes watered, but the scent of his own sickness was drowned out by the foul odor from the blood-soaked floor beneath him. How much blood? How could there be so much? His legs trembled violently as if they were no longer his own, a twisting, unbearable pressure in his chest choking out any semblance of clarity. Why can't I move? He screamed in his head. He was the #1 hero. He was supposed to save people, protect them, but in this moment he was paralyzed. This boy, this child, was dying right before his eyes. How could I let him die like this? The puddle of blood crept toward him, slowly, the crimson liquid seeping into every crack of the floor. All Might couldn't pull his eyes away. He felt sick. The world felt distant, disconnected, as if he were standing outside of his own body. He thought about the janitor. Why the hell am I thinking about the janitor? But the thought twisted into desperate panic, and all he could do was scream inwardly, "Please, someone help this child." And then it happened. A sickening crack split the air, a sound so wrong, so unnatural, it pierced through All Might's fragile thoughts. He watched in horror as Izuku's bones shifted, the fractured, exposed jagged edges of his skeleton moving like some kind of grotesque puppet, forcing themselves back into place with a sickening snap. Skin, muscle, and tendon followed, the wounds closing themselves as if they were never there. No scream, no cry, no sound at all. Just a child, reassembling himself like some broken doll. All Might stood in stunned silence, unable to do a single thing as he watched this impossible act of self-repair. It was like the boy was both killing himself and saving himself all at once, ripping apart, then stitching together in a way that no human body should ever be capable of. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't even blink as the child, Izuku, slowly, impossibly, became whole again. No scars, no bones exposed, no pain. Just a boy lying motionless, like the nightmare had never even happened. This can't be real. All Might's breath caught, then steadied. His body finally regained control, like an electric shock running through his veins, grounding him back to reality. He staggered forward, pulling Izuku's fragile form into his arms, his heart hammering in his chest. The boy was breathing. His chest rose and fell, faint but steady, like a quiet whisper of life amidst the storm. All Might's voice cracked as he muttered under his breath, "Recovery girl. I have to get him to Recovery girl." The news reached Aizawa far faster than it should have. As soon as class had ended, Present Mike burst into the room, his face pale and panic-stricken. Without a word, he grabbed Aizawa, and the two of them rushed out, moving with urgency as if time itself had caught fire. The class of 1A watched in stunned silence, the chaos unfolding before them in a blur. Even Nizu caught wind of the situation, his keen senses immediately reacting to the gravity of the moment. Within moments, Chiyo, Nizu, All Might, Present Mike, and Aizawa were all gathered in the infirmary, surrounding an unconscious but very much alive Izuku. Chiyo was already there, working quickly to assess Izuku's condition. The boy, pale and still, lay on the cot, unconscious but alive. His chest rose and fell with a fragile rhythm, but the damage done to him wasn't visible anymore. Whatever had happened, whatever the boy had done to himself, it was like nothing they'd ever seen before. All Might stood near the door, his expression one of disbelief, his mind still reeling from the sight of Izuku's self-inflicted mutilation and subsequent miraculous healing. His hands were still trembling, and the strong scent of blood lingered in his nostrils, making him want to vomit again. Aizawa stood beside him, his brow furrowed in deep thought, his arms crossed as he observed the unconscious boy. He looked every bit as disturbed as All Might, his eyes dark with concern. Nizu was there, too, his usual smile absent, his face grim as he watched the scene unfold. Even Present Mike, who usually kept things light, seemed shaken by the gravity of what had just transpired. What the hell happened? Aizawa's voice was low, but it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. His eyes locked on the security footage, his stomach turning with every second that passed. Chio only stared in horror at the sight. She already saw many awful things in her old life, but this was something else. "What did you do?" Aizawa turned on All Might with a snarl, his voice full of suppressed anger. He grabbed All Might's collar, shaking him. One rule. How could you let this happen?" All Might stammered, his face pale with horror. I didn't know. I just said, hi. I didn't know." "You couldn't follow one damn rule." Aizawa screamed, shaking All Might harder. Present Mike stood there, shocked, but knowing how much Aizawa cared for his students. Aizawa didn't show emotion often, but when he did, it was raw and intense. "I didn't know." All Might's voice cracked, and he stumbled back, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. Aizawa's fists clenched. He was still angry, still furious at All Might, but deep down he knew the truth. He couldn't let his emotions rule him now. "Enough!" Nizu interjected sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. Aizawa reluctantly released All Might, stepping back as a heavy silence settled over them all. Present Mike stepped in between them, unsure of how to defuse the tension. Chio continued to monitor Izuku's pulse, her gaze locked on the boy's still form. The sight of him, so fragile, so lifeless, haunted her, but the rhythm of his breath, the steady beat of his heart, reassured her. "Midoriya." Chio began softly, her voice tinged with regret. "He's been through more than we ever realized. If this kind of event is common for him, we can safely assume that he's been subjected to mental and physical torture. Not like we originally thought." Nizu's voice was grave, his words heavy with meaning. This boy was supposed to be quirkless, but now we know that's not true. His quirk is a curse that hurts him every time it activates. Aizawa's eyes flicked to Izuku, his hand running through his hair. Would this be enough to make him stay at UA? Nizu nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Chio's voice broke the silence, her disbelief evident. "You're going to use this trauma to make him stay in UA?" Aizawa's response was sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "What other choice do we have? Let him go out there and suffer again." Chio looked down, her expression softening as she understood the gravity of the situation. All Might felt a crushing weight in his chest. He had failed this child. He had let him down. And yet, somehow Izuku had come back. Alive, breathing. The guilt surged again, and All Might stumbled to the bathroom, the urge to vomit overwhelming him. He couldn't bear the weight of what had happened. Izuku woke up. The sterile light burned behind his eyelids, and the first thing he saw when they opened was him. Aizawa, then Chio, then Nizu, and a man with blonde hair. His breath hitched. His chest caved in. The weight of golden strands and hollow smiles came crashing down like a scream inside his skull. The memories slammed into him, again, and he trembled violently, hands twitching against the sheets like a child mid-nightmare. Hizashi's face crumbled the moment he understood. Without a word, Present Mike turned and walked out. His boots were soundless on the tile, like he was erasing himself. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If it was his face, his voice that dragged Izuku back into that place, then he had no right to stay. He would not be the shadow that haunted that boy's trembling bones. Aizawa's heart, a thing long accustomed to suppression, twisted painfully in his chest. Relief flooded through him like a cracked dam. He'd held onto that weak, steady beep, hoping, begging it meant something. But it was only now, with Izuku's slow, blinking eyes, that he believed. That the boy was here. Alive, still breathing, still reachable. And then, Izuku flinched. He remembered. The sharp breath. The panic. The monster's smile worn by every blonde-haired man. The way his body betrayed him, again. letting that third quirk rip itself from his soul when he hadn't even known it was there. His body folded in on itself. He wrapped his arms around his legs, pulling himself into a shaking ball, small as he could make himself, like maybe if he shrank enough, they'd forget he was ever here. Because maybe now they would punish him. Maybe now they'd see what he was, something unstable, something dangerous. Maybe they'd hurt him again. Or worse, use him. Take this new quirk and pry it out of him like glass from flesh. Maybe they'd abandon him. Throw him away now that he wasn't useful or clean or controllable. Maybe he'd never see Eri again. Or the one who once held his hand and called herself Mom. Or the soft-voiced therapist. Or the quiet promise of safety he'd just started to believe in. His gaze, flickering with fear and dread, finally landed on Aizawa. And what he saw there unraveled him. No anger, no disappointment, no fear. Just those eyes, tired, maybe, but steady, kind, unchanging. The kind of eyes that didn't punish. The kind that didn't shatter when he failed. The kind he'd only started to believe were real during those strange, fragile 2 weeks at UA. And they were still looking at him like he was just a boy. Not a weapon. Not a mistake. Just Izuku. He felt himself crying. So he did. He was scared. Hurt. He cried. Like a child. Like a traumatized child. His sobs were loud and desperate, as if his entire body was finally giving in to the pain it had been holding in for so long. He couldn't stop. It felt like all the fear, the terror, and the torment he had experienced was pouring out of him all at once, and he couldn't control it. He had never allowed himself to truly feel all of this, not like this. And then Aizawa was there. His arms wrapped around Izuku in a gentle, protective embrace, pulling him close, letting the boy sob into his chest. Aizawa didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Izuku was scared. So hurt. He had always been afraid of this moment, of being vulnerable, of being seen in his weakest state. But right now, in Aizawa's arms, he felt something else. Safety. The fear, the confusion, the doubts. They didn't disappear, but they were held, if only for a moment, by Aizawa's presence. Izuku didn't know how long he cried. Felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. The world outside faded away as he finally allowed himself to break. And in that moment, Aizawa held him through it all. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Aizawa knew they would need to talk about what happened, but now wasn't the moment. Everyone in the room understood that. A crying child who had just died? Maybe. The situation was a wreck, if not worse. After a long, wrung-out sobbing session, Izuku was finally too tired to cry anymore. He asked to go home. Something he had slowly started to call it. Aizawa brought him there. It was the end of the day anyway. They had barely stepped into the house when Eri entered the house too with her usual bright voice. "I'm home," she called out, beaming. Izuku was curled up in the darkest corner of the room, half hidden behind a tall potted plant. The moment she saw him, Eri froze. She didn't ask. She knew better. Sometimes it came back, the fear, the echoes of something terrible. And when it did, she just had to wait. Letting him have his space for a while would be fine. She was such a good sister. She nodded to herself. Then trotted over to Aizawa, who looked like he was trying to pour energy into his coffee cup by sheer willpower alone. "Hey Eri, how was your day?" He tried to sound normal. Tried. She climbed into a seat at the table across from him, her smile still intact. "It was super good. We did so many things. And I even learned how to count." He blinked, tired but smiling. "That's awesome, Eri. So tell me, what's 3 plus 2? She stuck her tongue out, counting diligently on her small fingers. 5. She shouted with pride. Aizawa chuckled, reaching over to ruffle her hair, earning a delighted giggle. Her eyes wandered toward Izuku. He was still hidden, head buried in his arms. Still in his little ball. It hurt, a little. But she reminded herself, again and again, that it was okay. Healing was messy. She still had nightmares too, sometimes. Nightmares of her monster. Still she wanted to help him. At the very least making sure he was fine. She took a breath, got up, and walked over to him. Not too close, not too far. Izuku felt her presence. He peeked up from his arm. Izuku! Her voice was sweet and light, like nothing was wrong. How was your day? She sat on the floor near him, not invading, just waiting. Mine was great. I learned addition and drew a pony. She kept talking, bubbling about her school day, trying to ease him. Izuku looked at her. Not just looked, but saw her. Her smile wasn't forced. It wasn't the scary one from the facility. It was soft, warm. He knew what she was doing. And he felt glad to have such a good sister, something Eri asked to be called as. He tapped his side. She understood immediately. She scooted closer, squeezing into the small space beside him. The pot spilled a bit of dirt, but neither of them cared. She kept talking, occasionally pausing to help Izuku find the words with his hands. She too was learning sign language to speak with him. From the kitchen, Aizawa watched the scene with a rare warmth blooming in his chest. He didn't know how Eri did it, how she always managed to soothe Izuku like this. But he wouldn't change it for the world. He found himself smiling. Then the doorbell rang. Everyone froze for a second. Eri paused mid-sentence. Even Izuku lifted his head. Aizawa raised a brow. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door. Standing there was Hizashi. Not present Mike. Just Hizashi. In civilian clothes. With brown hair? Hizashi. It was all Aizawa managed, blinking at the sight. Hey Shota, like my new look. He grinned, striking a ridiculous pose to show off his dyed hair. It suits you. Aizawa replied, deadpan but with a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. What are you doing here? Hizashi scratched the back of his neck, a bit sheepish. I felt bad about what happened to Midoriya. Thought I'd check in. Maybe stay for dinner. The faintest blush dusted his cheeks. Aizawa sighed. But he wasn't hiding the smile this time. Come in. Hizashi stepped inside, immediately noticing how dim the lighting was. Hey kids. Eri lit up like a lantern and ran toward him. It's Mr. Annoying Blonde Man. Izuku knew that definitely wasn't his name. Hizashi laughed heartily, scooping her up into the air like an airplane. I told you to stop calling him that, Eri. Aizawa said, shutting the door behind him. She just giggled in response, completely unbothered as she soared through the living room. Once he gently set her down, despite her little pout, Hizashi turned toward the still huddled boy in the corner. Hey, you remember me? He beamed. Izuku nodded slowly, watching him. He wasn't afraid this time. Brown hair made him look softer. Less like the masked man from the facility. Then Hizashi turned to Aizawa again. Want me to make dinner? I know you've had quite a day. Aizawa blinked. His mug was half empty, and his shoulders still ached from stress. Yes, he said simply with a sigh of relief. Their eyes met. Just for a second. A soft, familiar silence hung between them. Hizashi grinned and wandered toward the fridge, already opening drawers and humming quietly. Meanwhile, Aizawa collapsed onto the couch with the kind of exhausted noise that only came from being both drained and finally safe. He let his eyes fall shut, just for a moment. He wasn't asleep. But he didn't feel so tired anymore. Mr. Aizawa, Mr. Aizawa. Eri's voice rang out, unbothered by the clear signs of exhaustion on his face. Still, he opened his eyes again slowly, and gave her a tired but genuine smile. Yes, Eri. She stood proudly in front of him, hands clasped tightly with Izuku's. He was out of his corner now, blinking softly at the light, a little unsure, but standing. Did you know Izuku can hold a pen now? He can draw with me. She nearly bounced in place with excitement. Aizawa's gaze softened. He turned to Izuku and ruffled the boy's messy hair, letting his hand linger a moment in quiet praise. Congratulations, kiddo. I'm proud of you. Izuku's cheeks flushed. He looked down, nervously twisting the hem of his shirt between his fingers. Eri, on the other hand, giggled with pride, as if she had learned to hold it instead. Her joy was contagious. She tugged gently on Izuku's arm. Come on, let's go draw. Izuku nodded. And with that, the two disappeared toward her room, a hushed buzz of laughter trailing behind them. Aizawa leaned back into the couch, exhaling slowly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, filled with life, warmth, and the quiet miracle of healing children. From the kitchen, the savory smell of something hearty drifted into the room, rich and grounding. It smells good, he murmured. He didn't even need to raise his voice. Hisashi, still humming by the stove, called back easily. Of course it does. I cook with love. Aizawa rolled his eyes, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips again. Maybe today hadn't been good. But it was ending well, and in this house that counted for something. The soft clatter of pans and utensils in the kitchen was strangely comforting. Aizawa let the sound wash over him while he melted into the couch, eyelids low but not closed. His shoulders were still heavy, but it was a manageable kind of weight now, the kind that didn't crush. Eventually, Hisashi walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs. He placed one on the coffee table, then settled into the armchair across from him. Chamomile, he said, tilting his head toward the untouched mug. You looked like you needed something besides battery acid. Aizawa lifted the drink, sniffed it once. You're not wrong, he murmured, then took a sip. They didn't speak for a while. The house held a kind of silence only homes knew, one where footsteps and far-off laughter meant peace, not tension. The scratching of pencils could be heard from down the hall, Eri's voice occasionally chirping with excitement, Izuku's low sounds of agreement or small taps of fingers echoing beside her. Finally, Hisashi leaned forward. His voice, when he spoke, was careful. How bad was it? After I left the room. Aizawa didn't look at him. He stared into his mug like it could offer answers. Bad, he said eventually. I've never seen that child cry like that before. A pause. Then quietly, I don't know what he's been through, but it's probably worse than we can imagine. Hisashi's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. I feel like I failed him. Again, every time I promise he'll be safe with me, something goes wrong and... He stopped, not wanting to break down in front of Hisashi. It's normal for a child to have a traumatic response. You know that, right? Hisashi said softly, his voice almost rocking with gentleness. I know, it's just... Aizawa brought both hands to his face, dragging them down in frustration. Then came a whisper from Hisashi. Shota. I don't know how much more he's carrying. Every time I think we've reached the worst of it, another layer peels back. Hisashi leaned back, running a hand through his now brown hair. And you're just handling all of this alone? Aizawa gave a weak snort. You think I have time to fall apart? No, but you should have someone. Their eyes met for a moment. It was quiet again, but not empty. It was filled with something gentle, something understanding. I have someone, Aizawa said simply. The weight of that landed. Hisashi smiled, small and warm. Then, dinner time. Eri's voice exploded through the house like a cannonball. Aizawa groaned, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Hisashi laughed. You sure she's not part dragon? She's just excited, Aizawa muttered, but he was already standing, which means I have exactly 30 seconds before she starts trying to carry the curry pot herself. They walked to the kitchen together. The lights were warm. The mismatched plates Eri had set were already half crooked. Izuku was trying very seriously to help her line up the utensils, tongue poking out in focus. "Hi, Mr. Hizashi," Eri chirped when they entered. "We did everything ourselves. You two are a dream team," he said dramatically, ruffling both their heads. Izuku gave a small nod, still hugging a spoon to his chest. Aizawa looked around the table and let out a breath. The smell of the food, the laughter, the way Eri kept rearranging the chairs so Izuku could sit beside her. It all felt almost ordinary. Soft, real. And only Hizashi knew how fragile that peace had been just hours ago. Only he saw the cracks still healing in Aizawa's tired eyes. But neither of them said anything. They just sat down to eat. And it was enough. Dinner was a patchwork of warmth. Eri insisted on serving everyone herself, even if it meant small spills and slightly uneven portions. Izuku, still a bit unsure about how to eat properly, was more focused on trying to manage his food than anything else. His hands fumbled with his utensils, occasionally knocking over a glass or spilling a little rice. But now he wasn't scared to be punished for it or anything. He simply tried again without frustration. That sight was reassuring for Aizawa. After the whole deal today, he was scared Izuku would struggle to feel safe again. But it seemed his worries were unjustified. Hizashi, who had cooked the meal, made a big show of complimenting the food, making some noise while eating, even adding, "This is the best curry I've had in a decade," with theatrical reverence, dramatically placing a hand over his heart. "It's not true. I made the best curry last time with Miss Midnight." Eri added some food still in mouth. Izuku and Aizawa stayed in silence while the two argued over who could make the best curry. It wouldn't be shocking if by the end of dinner the food would be more on the nap than their mouth. Even so, Aizawa couldn't help but let out a tired smile tugging at his lips. After dinner, while Eri and Izuku were getting to go to bed, Aizawa stayed behind to wash the dishes. Hizashi, who had been quietly clearing the table, joined him without being asked, rolling up his sleeves. "They're good together," Hizashi said, passing over a plate. Aizawa didn't answer immediately. He focused on rinsing the plate in his hands before he spoke. "Yeah," he murmured. "I'm glad they fit like pieces of a puzzle." There was a pause before Hizashi spoke again. "So, what was that with the whole Mr. Annoying Blonde Man?" he jokingly said. Aizawa only smiled. "I don't know who she heard it from." Aizawa didn't look up. He just passed another dish to Hizashi, trying to hide his smile growing wider. "Truly a mystery," he added, the sound of the water and plates trying to hide both of their laughs, momently forgetting what had happened, and the horror of the discussion they would have tomorrow. Putting the kids to sleep was more than easy. It was a tough and long day for Izuku, and he fell quickly in the hand of Morphe. Eri simply stayed with Izuku, still not in the bed, still in the corner but clearly comfortable. Now truly alone, Aizawa and Hizashi sat on the sofa, another tea in hand. They sat in silence for a few moments, the steam from their tea curling in the air. The house was quiet, still, and it felt like for the first time today everything could exhale. Hizashi leaned back into the sofa, resting his mug on his chest. "Hey, remember that summer we tried camping on the dorm roof?" he said suddenly, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Aizawa didn't look at him, but his brow lifted slightly. "You brought a single blanket, no food, and I think a broken flashlight." "Ah, but I did bring a speaker," Hizashi countered, "and a playlist. That should count for something." Aizawa snorted. "You blew the speaker trying to make it loud enough to scare off crows. Successfully, might I add." They fell quiet again, the memory settling between them like a familiar coat. "I think that was the first time I saw you sleep more than 4 hours." Hisashi added. You just curled up in that hammock like a cat and vanished. Aizawa smirked faintly. That's because you talked for hours. Eventually, I just tuned you out. I'm honored, Hisashi said dryly, sipping his tea. Truly. Their smiles lingered longer this time. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the quiet comfort of still being here, after everything. You've changed, Hisashi said softly after a moment. Aizawa turned his head slightly. You think. You still look like you're running on coffee and spite. But. He hesitated, then nodded toward the hallway where the kids had gone to sleep. You have a softness now. It's not weakness, just gentleness, even if it's quiet. Aizawa didn't answer right away. He just looked down at his tea, thinking. They changed me, he said at last, without even trying. Yeah. Hisashi leaned his head back, letting it rest against the back of the couch. That's what kids do. Aizawa sipped the last of his tea, then stared into the empty cup for a moment longer than necessary. They're not just kids, he said finally, voice low. They're survivors. Every day they wake up and keep going. That's strength I didn't have at their age. You give them something to hold on to, Hisashi replied. That matters. Silence fell again, not awkward, just full. The kind of silence that meant everything had already been said. Eventually, Hisashi shifted, setting his mug down on the coffee table with a soft clink. I should go, he murmured. Got work early, and if I fall asleep on this couch again, I'll wake up with the worst back pain I ever had in years. Aizawa snorted. Come on, it's not that awful. Hisashi stood, stretching a little. He moved to the door slowly, like he wasn't quite ready to leave the warmth of the room behind. He turned back just before stepping out. His voice was soft, serious this time. Shota, if it gets too heavy, you don't have to carry it alone. Not with me around. Aizawa looked at him, tired but not guarded. I know, he said. Thanks. Hisashi gave a small nod, his expression unreadable in the low light. Then, with a quiet good night, he slipped out the door. The apartment was still again. Aizawa stood there for a moment longer, then turned to head down the hall. He passed the kids' room quietly, pausing just long enough to glance in. Eri and Izuku were curled up in their corner nest of blankets. Safe, breathing deep. He closed the door softly behind him. Tomorrow would come with its weight, but for now there was peace. When the morning breeze stirred through the half-open window, Izuku knew the sun had risen. Sleep had evaded him once again, the nightmares clinging to the edges of his thoughts like cobwebs. He had grown used to these sleepless nights. Watching Eri sleep beside him was far more peaceful than any dream he could have. He hated waking her, but their morning routines waited, his therapy, her special class. Gently, with a touch that barely rustled the blanket, Izuku reached out. She stirred slowly, blinking as she yawned and looked around. It was no longer strange to wake up in Izuku's room. In fact, it had become her comfort. Falling asleep without him nearby was almost impossible now. Her eyes landed on his face and lingered on the dark shadows under his eyes. He hadn't slept again. But she didn't say anything. It wasn't unusual. She remembered when she was first rescued by Aizawa, how fear kept her awake for months. Back then, he stayed with her. She wanted to be that for Izuku now. Rubbing her eyes with her fists, Eri groaned softly. Her head felt heavy, and she didn't want to leave the cocoon of warmth beneath the blanket. But when Izuku stood up, shedding the blanket, she found it easier to follow. That was how most mornings went. Downstairs, Aizawa sat at the table, coffee in hand, the dark circles under his eyes rivaling Izuku's. Good morning, he muttered, voice still rough with sleep. Izuku nodded back in silent acknowledgement. Eri shuffled over, still rubbing her eyes, and climbed onto a chair with the grace of a half-asleep kitten. Good morning, she mumbled, barely audible between yawns. Izuku didn't usually eat breakfast, but Aizawa insisted he try. Something about breakfast being the most important meal of the day. So he sat and poured himself a bowl of cereal, ignoring how overly sweet it tasted. Aizawa rubbed at his temple, his headache already pulsing. The upcoming meeting with the other adults about yesterday's incident weighed heavily on his mind. Now ready to start the day, Aizawa took both of the kids to their meeting, leaving his peaceful home to the time they would go back in the evening. In front of the principal door, he was accompanied by Present Mike, Chio, and even this idiot of All Might. Yes, he was still mad about yesterday's event. They entered the room, silence hanging heavily between them. "Good morning, everyone." Nizu's calm voice broke the tension. He sat at his desk, a steaming cup of tea in hand, as composed as ever. Sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the room with warmth, but it couldn't lift the atmosphere. "I believe we all understand why we're here," Nizu began. "We need to make sense of what happened yesterday." Chairs scraped against the floor as everyone took their seats. Uneasy glances were exchanged. "All Might, if you would," Nizu prompted gently though firmly. All eyes turned to him. He looked pale, haunted. His posture sagged beneath the weight of memory. "I already said I don't remember everything," he began, voice gravelly and quiet. "It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. The child Izuku screamed when he saw me. Then, his bones started piercing through his skin. His body twisted into something I've never seen before." He paused, words catching in his throat. It didn't help him. It hurt him. It wasn't a quirk that gave him strength. It was agony incarnate. A deep breath left him as if he had only now remembered to breathe. All Might had seen horror, more than his fair share. Cities destroyed. Screams echoing through rubble. People broken beyond repair. As the symbol of peace, he had learned to carry those memories, to endure. But this was different. This hadn't come from a villain. There was no name, no face to blame. This had come from within a child. A boy who had done nothing wrong. A boy who looked at All Might as if he were the monster. The transformation had been grotesque. Violence made flesh. Every inch of Izuku's skin ruptured from the inside out. Bones sliced through his body like blades. Blood had spilled in horrifying amounts, far more than a child should even have. The air had filled with the metallic stench of pain. And the screaming. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was raw. It sounded like something deep inside Izuku's soul had broken and spilled out. A cry that didn't fade. It stuck in the mind, echoing long after the moment passed. All Might had held the dying. He had buried the innocent. He had learned to shut grief behind a door. But not this. This wasn't death, it was something worse. A child dragged back to life not through miracle but by something unnatural. A force that defied the rules of life itself. A cruelty with no name. He had always believed he could protect people. That he was a wall between darkness and the innocent. But in that moment he hadn't been a wall. He had been a witness. Powerless. And it changed him. No hero, no man could witness that and remain the same. "Are you sure he stopped breathing?" Chio asked, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I know what I saw." All Might answered, firmer this time. The memory wouldn't leave him. It visited him even in sleep. Nizu placed his cup down with a subtle thud. "Then we can conclude that Izuku Midoriya developed a quirk during his time in captivity," he stated. "Not only that," he added, "but we may be witnessing the first successful case of an artificial quirk." The silence returned, heavier than before. "What do you mean?" Present Mike asked, voice tight. "I mean," Nizu said, gaze sharpening, "Maestro, the man who abducted Midoriya, succeeded in creating a quirk, one that causes harm to the host, yes, but a quirk nonetheless. That's supposed to be impossible." Present Mike slumped further into his chair, stunned. He did the impossible. Nizu simply added, letting the information sink in. The weight of that possibility settled over the room like lead. If the Hero Public Safety Commission found out, chaos would follow. If the public knew, it could unravel society. If villains found out, Izuku's life would never be safe again. There were too many ifs. One thing was certain, Izuku Midoriya was in danger. Villains would want him. The commission would want to replicate him. The public might fear him. This boy, already buried under trauma, was now even more vulnerable in freedom than he had ever been in captivity. Nizu turned to Aizawa. I'll tell the commission it's similar to Ares, unstable and dangerous. It's true enough. It'll buy us time, but we hide the rest. Aizawa nodded grimly. Hiding is lying, All Might warned. If they find out. We don't have a choice, Nizu cut in. Letting him out would be worse. All Might looked down, conflicted. But he knew Nizu was right. I want you with him at all times. Nizu continued, turning his eyes towards Aizawa. If it happens again, others could get hurt. He gathered papers into folders, planning ahead. He's just a kid. We can't treat him like a threat. Present Mike protested. He's a kid with a threat inside him, Aizawa replied. That doesn't change his heart, but it does change our responsibility. If this happens again, Chio said softly, his body might not survive. Can we help him control it? We don't know yet, Nizu answered. We'll ask when he's ready. Until then, we observe. We protect. He looked at each of them in turn. I know you're all scared. I am too. But worry doesn't help. Action does. Midoriya needs us. So we protect him with everything we have. He let the words settle, heavy and clear. This information stays here. Tell no one. The meeting ended, but the weight of it followed each of them as they left the room. Aizawa had a little more time before class. So, following Nizu's instructions, he headed to the therapy room. He knocked gently, and a soft feminine voice invited him in. As he stepped inside, he was met with the warm scent of spring air drifting through the open window. The therapist looked up, curious about his presence, but Aizawa's gaze was fixed on the green-haired child sitting quietly. Izuku, do you mind if I take you to class? Though it was his duty, Aizawa still wanted to ask. He needed Izuku's consent. Thankfully, the boy nodded and walked over without hesitation. Are you sure it's fine? Our session isn't quite over yet, and he'll miss his special class. The therapist asked gently. It wasn't a protest, just genuine curiosity. It's fine. Starting tomorrow, his schedule will change. He'll only stay with you for 1 or 2 hours, and his special class will be reduced as well. The therapist didn't like the change, but she nodded nonetheless. She had no authority to override the decisions made by those above her. They knew better. She hoped. And just like that, Izuku was taken to Class 1A. Aizawa felt uneasy. Bringing Izuku into the classroom was risky. Last time, one of the students recognized him, something that could have ended in disaster. Still, he brushed off his nerves and focused on getting through the day without incident. When he entered the classroom, it was buzzing with laughter. Izuku followed quietly behind. Aizawa instinctively switched off the lights, surprising the students. Are we watching a movie, Sensei? An energetic blonde boy called out. No, the child I mentioned a few weeks ago needs to remain under my supervision. Starting today, Izuku Midoriya will be staying with this class. The class erupted with noise, some surprised, others curious. Thankfully, the energy was positive. Sensei, will Midoriya be our classmate from now on? A small, purple-haired boy asked, raising his hand. No, he won't. He's only staying temporarily. Aizawa watched as Izuku walked straight to the nearest corner of the room, settling beside his desk. He sighed quietly, then turned to one student in particular. Bakugu. The blonde, explosive boy finally looked up. Guilt and pain were written all over his face. May I speak with you? Another private conversation. The rest of the class exchanged glances. They'd always suspected Bakugu had some connection to this mysterious child, but they never asked. They certainly hadn't expected to see him again. Once the two of them left the room, Mina Ishido, pink skin, yellow horns, and boundless energy, sprang from her seat, seizing the opportunity. Hi, I'm Mina Ishido, and you are Izuku Midoriya, right? She asked brightly, extending a hand toward Izuku, who remained huddled in the corner. Mina, maybe don't get too close, a dark-haired girl with a ponytail said gently, placing a hand on Mina's shoulder. It seems like he doesn't like people getting too close. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to scare you or anything. Mina laughed awkwardly and stuck out her tongue. Izuku quickly shook his head, trying to show he wasn't bothered. Then a soft, barely audible, "Fine," slipped from his lips. OMG, so cute. Mina squealed as she bounced in place, overcome with excitement. Mina, calm down, geez. A boy with dark hair and a wide grin walked over, his tone casual. Hey bro, I'm Hantasiro. Nice to meet you. Temporary classmate. He smiled warmly, but the crowd forming around him was starting to overwhelm Izuku. He wasn't used to this much attention. As more students began to approach, he stood up and edged along the wall, trying to create space. The students chuckled at the sight, not mockingly, but fondly. Then Izuku saw it, darkness. Deeper than the corner, darker than the room, even darker than night. He bolted toward it and curled himself into it. Tokoyami's feathers rustled at the contact. Looking down, he saw the boy now nestled at his feet. What are you doing? Tokoyami asked, a mix of confusion and embarrassment in his voice. The girls squealed at the sight, which only deepened his blush. He hated being the center of attention. Izuku didn't answer. Instead, Tokoyami's sentient quirk shifted curiously. Dark shadow tilted its head, then let out a squeal of its own. OMG, he's too cute. Want cuddles? Sure, I'll give you cuddles. The shadowy figure began to twirl around Izuku, babbling about his cuteness and other nonsense, while Tokoyami tried to shrink into the floor. Hey Tokoyami, I think the new kid likes you. Jiro teased from across the room, her headphone jacks twitching with amusement. Please, don't talk about this. It's already embarrassing enough. Ah, come on, Tokoyami. Let him have a cuddle. Mina teased, watching dark shadow swirl protectively around the small green-haired boy. Tokoyami crossed his arms and sighed, clearly mortified. Dark shadow has no concept of personal boundaries. Oh hush, you love it. Jiro smirked, nudging him playfully before walking over to Izuku. She crouched down a bit to be more at eye level. Hey Midoriya, right? She asked gently. That's a cool name. I'm Kyoka Jiro. Nice to meet you. Izuku blinked at her, unsure how to respond. He gave the smallest nod, fingers clinging to the edge of dark shadow like it was a blanket. Mina gasped again, whisper shouting behind her hand to Siro. Did you see that? He nodded. He likes us. I mean, I'd like us too. Siro said proudly, striking a cheesy pose that made Kirishima laugh across the room. Hey, you're totally gonna scare the poor guy. Kirishima called out, walking over. Yo, Midoriya, I'm Jiro Kirishima, but you can call me Kiri if you want. You like manly stuff? Like action figures? Or swords? Or spicy food? Izuku looked completely lost at the avalanche of questions but managed a tiny smile, which was apparently enough. He smiled. Mina whisper-shouted again, grabbing Jiro's arm. I'm gonna cry. He's so cute. Should we get him a snack or something? Sato asked from his desk, already pulling a cookie out of his lunchbox. I have sugar cookies. Does he like sweets? You're gonna bribe the new kid with cookies? Kaminari laughed, flipping his chair around to sit backwards. Smart move. That's how I make friends too. He leaned closer, a wide grin on his face. Hey dude, I'm Kaminari Denki, resident electric guy. Wanna sit near me? I promise I don't shock unless it's on accident. Which is only, like, sometimes. Izuku's eyes widened slightly, more from the energy than the words, and he inched slightly deeper behind Dark Shadow. Oh no, Kaminari said, dramatically falling over his chair. I already messed up, didn't I? No, you just have a high volume setting, Yaoyorozu commented with a polite smile as she approached. Don't worry, Midoriya. Not all of us are quite so enthusiastic. Hey! Kaminari protested as the others laughed. I'm Yaoyorozu Momo. If you ever need anything, school supplies, food, whatever, I can make it. Literally. Izuku blinked again. He didn't quite understand what she meant, but the offer sounded kind. Then, Ida stood up suddenly and adjusted his glasses. Allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Tenya Ida, class representative of 1A. If you require assistance navigating the building or wish to understand the class structure, I am at your service. Izuku flinched a bit at the volume, but Ida didn't notice. Tenya, Jairu said dryly, maybe try not to sound like a tour guide from a museum next time. Izuku, overwhelmed but not scared, slowly peeked out from Dark Shadow's cover and looked around. So many people. So many names. So many smiles. No one was yelling. No one looked angry. They were all laughing. With him. Finally, he took a step forward, out of the shadow, his small hand gripping the hem of his shirt. Thank you, he whispered. He talked again. Mina shrieked, bouncing in place. And he's out of the corner, Zero pointed. Guys, we're making progress. We should keep a chart, Kaminari joked. Day 1. Subject leaves corner. Next up, eye contact. Izuku blinked at all the attention, then sat down on the floor right where he stood, curling his knees to his chest and facing away slightly. Not returning to the corner, but not quite ready to be in the group either. Dark Shadow circled once, then settled behind him again like a looming pillow fort. Okay, maybe we tone it down, Jairu muttered, elbowing Kaminari in the ribs. He's not a science experiment. He is reacting though, Yaoyorozu said softly. That's a good thing, right? Totally, Mina whispered. But let's not all rush him with 50 friendship declarations just yet. Agreed, Ida said firmly. We must pace ourselves. Uraraka glanced over. Maybe we should do something normal? Like, play a game? Make it feel less like he's on display. That's a good idea, Tsuyu said. Just be ourselves. The idea caught quickly. In no time, Kaminari and Mina had pulled out a deck of cards. Speed round, Mina offered, wagging her eyebrows. Winner gets bragging rights. Loser has to do a chicken dance. Pass. Jairu said immediately. Accept, said Kirishima, grinning as he sat cross-legged nearby. Manly stakes. As the game began, the group naturally shifted its energy. The attention on Izuku lessened, not gone, but no longer so concentrated. The room hummed with laughter and competitive banter. Izuku, still seated near the wall, let his eyes drift sideways. Watching, listening. No one pulled him in. No one touched him. But they made space for him. That was new. He didn't smile. But he didn't retreat either. After a few minutes, he turned slightly to keep watching. When Zero lost and started doing an exaggerated flailing dance, complete with chicken clucks, Izuku tilted his head. Ridiculous! Tokoyami muttered behind him. Dark Shadow laughed loudly. You're just jealous I have fun. We share a body. Tokoyami replied flatly. Then Izuku's fingers twitched. Just once. Barely noticeable. But Uraraka noticed. She didn't say anything, just smiled gently to herself and leaned back against her desk. Maybe, just maybe, he'd be okay here. The door slid open with a soft click. Conversations in the classroom paused like a record scratching. Heads turned, eyes widening. Aizawa stepped back into the room, followed closely by Bakugu, whose usual scowl was subdued. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, jaw clenched. The teacher's tired gaze swept the room. No one was screaming. No desks were flying. Izuku was still in the room. So far, so good. Aizawa's eyes narrowed slightly when he spotted Izuku sitting near the wall, still curled but upright, now partially encircled by Tokoyami and his overly affectionate Quirk. The rest of the class was playing cards, chatting, or pretending not to be watching the boy every few seconds. Good. They were giving him room. Bakugu hesitated at the threshold. His red eyes flicked toward the green-haired boy and immediately flinched. Izuku hadn't looked at him, hadn't moved. There was no recognition, none of the flinching fear, none of the strained politeness Bakugu had braced himself for. Just nothing. Like he was a stranger. Don't force anything, Aizawa muttered under his breath, loud enough for only Bakugu to hear. Just be part of the room, that's all. TCH. Bakugu's lips pulled tight, but he gave a sharp nod. They both walked deeper into the room. Aizawa settled behind his desk, already pulling out paperwork. Bakugu walked past the others, ignoring Kaminari's quick glance and Mina's soft wave. He slid down into his usual seat with a thud, one row away from Izuku's little corner. He didn't speak. He didn't stare. He just sat. And Izuku turned his head ever so slightly. Barely emotion. Barely more than a flick of curiosity. But for Bakugu, it might as well have been the world shaking. His fingers gripped the side of his desk. He didn't even realize he was holding his breath until Kirishima, trying to act casual, threw a crumpled piece of paper at his head. "Oi!" he whispered. "You good?" Bakugu didn't answer, but the paper hit the floor without being incinerated, so that was something. Meanwhile, Izuku slowly lowered his legs and uncurled from his sitting position. He didn't stand up. He didn't speak. But he scooted an inch to the side, just 1 inch closer to the rest of the room. Just enough for Tokoyami to notice. Just enough for Uraraka to quietly nudge Yaoyorozu and gesture without words. "Did you see that?" And Aizawa, from his desk, let out a long, quiet breath. Progress. No explosions. No panic. Just a classroom full of quirks, chaos, and one boy learning how to breathe again in the space between voices. The rest of the morning passed. Izuku didn't speak. No one forced him to. He sat in the corner near Aizawa's desk, his arms around his knees, sometimes watching, sometimes staring at nothing. The classroom was filled with voices, some loud, some gentle, but none directed at him. Not anymore. It was like they had agreed, all silently, to just let him be. And that was good. That was enough. Even when they practiced hero maneuvers outside, Aizawa didn't make him join. He just gave him a nod toward the shade of a tree. Izuku sat under it, watching. A few students ran past him. Kaminari with his grin. Ashido waving dramatically as she skated across the ground with her acid slick. Uraraka floating something in the distance while Siro swung through the air. They didn't forget he was there. But they didn't pull him in. He appreciated that. Bakugu didn't look at him. Not once. He was sharp and aggressive with everyone else. Sparking, barking, snarling when Kaminari or Kirishima got too casual. But around Izuku? Nothing. His eyes flickered toward the corner sometimes, but they never stayed. He kept his distance, so carefully that it was obvious. Izuku didn't know why, didn't ask, didn't remember, but the air around Bakugu felt tense, like the way old walls creaked before a storm. Izuku stayed away. That was safest. Lunch came and went. Tokoyami offered him a seat. Not with words, just by leaving the space next to him open in the shade. Dark shadow hovered protectively, a little quieter than usual, but still humming nonsense about feathers and comfort. Izuku sat there. Didn't eat much. Just what was given to him. Something soft. Something plain. Uraraka waved once from her table. He waved back. And she smiled. By the time the final class wrapped up, the sun had started lowering through the windows. It painted the walls in orange and gold. Aizawa stood up, stretching his back with a yawn. His hair fell loose around his face. "That's all for today," he said lazily. "Good work. No homework. For once." The class cheered. Izuku flinched. Not badly. Just a blink. He looked down at his lap again. The scraping of chairs, the rush of footsteps, the swirl of backpacks and shoes and half-finished conversations. Izuku stayed seated in the corner as they began to file out. Then a soft voice near the door. "Bye, Midoriya." "Ishido." He looked up. She smiled, beaming, then ducked out with her friends. Jairu offered a quiet, "See ya tomorrow, maybe," and followed. Only a few students lingered. A boy with white and red hair passed by without a word. His expression unreadable, cold, distant. His eyes landed on Izuku for a heartbeat too long, then moved on without acknowledgement. As if storing a file for later. Izuku shivered slightly. He didn't know why. Finally, only Aizawa, Bakugu, and Izuku were left. Bakugu was gathering his bag, stiff movements, still not looking at him. Aizawa walked up, crouched down to be at Izuku's eyes level. "You did well today," he said lowly, like it was just for him. "You can go back to the therapist's office now or come with me. Your choice." He stood slowly. Then he pointed just slightly in Aizawa's direction. "You." It was barely audible, but Aizawa heard it. That was the first time Aizawa heard Izuku talk. He brushed off his shock and smiled. "All right." Bakugu was already at the door, back turned, his shoulders hunched. "Bakugu!" Aizawa called. The boy stopped, turned halfway, not toward Izuku. "Thanks for today." Bakugu said nothing, but his jaw clenched. His fingers curled tight on the strap of his bag. He left. Aizawa looked at Izuku again, ruffled his hair and left the room. Izuku followed without resistance. The day was a success.